Remember to check out my Patreon page for full audiobooks and loads more extra content. Remember, there's always time for another story. Chapter 9. Leo. Leo spent the night wrestling with a 40-foot-tall Athena. Ever since they'd brought the statue aboard, Leo had been obsessed with figuring out how it worked. He was sure it had primo powers. There had to be a secret switch or a pressure plate or something. He was supposed to be sleeping, but he just couldn't. He spent hours crawling over the statue, which took up most of the lower deck. Athena's feet stuck into sickbay, so you had to squeeze past her ivory toes if you wanted some painkillers. Her body ran the length of the port corridor, her outstretched hand jutting into the engine room, offering the life-sized figure of Nike that stood in her palm like, "Here, have some victory." Athena's serene face took up most of the aft Pegasus stables, which were fortunately unoccupied. If Leo were a magic horse, he wouldn't have wanted to live in a stall with an oversized goddess of wisdom staring at him. The statue was wedged tight in the corridor, so Leo had to climb over the top and wriggle under her limbs, searching for levers and buttons. As usual, he found nothing. He'd done some research on the statue. He knew it was made from a hollow wooden frame covered in ivory and gold, which explained why it was so light. It was in pretty good shape, considering it was more than 2,000 years old and had been pillaged from Athens, toted to Rome and secretly stored in a spider's cavern for most of the past 2 millennia. Magic must have kept it intact, Leo figured, combined with really good craftsmanship. Annabeth had said, well, he tried not to think about Annabeth. He still felt guilty about her and Percy falling into Tartarus. Leo knew it was his fault. He should have got everyone safely on board the Argo too before he started securing the statue. He should have realised the cavern floor was unstable. Still, moping around wasn't going to get Percy and Annabeth back. He had to concentrate on fixing the problems he could fix. Anyway, Annabeth had said the statue was the key to defeating Gaia. It could heal the rift between Greek and Roman demigods. Leo figured there had to be more to it than just symbolism. Maybe Athena's eyes shot lasers, or the snake behind her shield could spit poison. Or maybe the smaller figure of Nike came to life and busted out some ninja moves. Leo could think of all kinds of fun things the statue might do if he had designed it, but the more he examined it, the more frustrated he got. The Athena Parthenos radiated magic. Even he could feel that, but it didn't seem to do anything except look impressive. The ship careened to one side, taking evasive manoeuvres. Leo resisted the urge to run to the helm. Jason, Piper and Frank were on duty with Hazel now. They could handle whatever was going on. Besides, Hazel had insisted on taking the wheel to guide them through the secret pass that the magic goddess had told her about. Leo hoped Hazel was right about the long detour north. He didn't trust this Hecate lady. He didn't see why such a creepy goddess would suddenly decide to be helpful. Of course, he didn't trust magic in general. That's why he was having so much trouble with the Athena Parthenos. It had no moving parts. Whatever it did, it apparently operated on pure sorcery, and Leo didn't appreciate that. He wanted to make sense, like a machine. Finally, he got too exhausted to think straight. He curled up with a blanket in the engine room and listened to the soothing hum of the generators. Buford, the mechanical table, sat in the corner in sleep mode, making little steamy snores. Shh, shh. Leo liked his quarters okay, but he felt safest here in the heart of the ship. In a room filled with mechanisms he knew how to control. Besides, maybe if he spent more time close to the Athena Parthenos, he would eventually soak in its secrets. "It's you or me, big lady," he murmured as he pulled the blanket up to his chin. "You're going to cooperate eventually." He closed his eyes and slept. Unfortunately, that meant dreams. He was running for his life through his mother's old workshop, where she died in a fire when Leo was 8. He wasn't sure what was chasing him, but he sensed it closing fast, something large and dark and full of hate. He stumbled into workbenches, knocked over toolboxes and tripped on electrical cords. He spotted the exit and sprinted towards it, but a figure loomed in front of him, a woman in robes of dry, swirling earth, her face covered in a veil of dust. "Where are you going, little hero?" Gaia asked. "Stay and meet my favourite son." Leo darted to the left, but the earth goddess's laughter followed him. "The night your mother died, I warned you. I said the fates would not allow me to kill you then, but now you have chosen your path. Your death is near, Leo Valdez." He ran into a drafting table, his mother's old workstation. The wall behind it was decorated with Leo's crayon drawings. He sobbed in desperation and turned, but the thing pursuing him now stood in his path. A colossal being wrapped in shadows, its shape vaguely humanoid, its head almost scraping the ceiling 20 feet above. Leo's hands burst into flame. He blasted the giant, but the darkness consumed his fire. Leo reached for his tool belt. The pockets were sewn shut. He tried to speak, to say anything that would save his life, but he couldn't make a sound, as if the air had been stolen from his lungs. "My son will not allow any fires tonight," Gaia said from the depths of the warehouse. "He is the void that consumes all magic, the cold that consumes all fire, the silence that consumes all speech." Leo wanted to shout, "And I'm the dude that's all out of here." His voice didn't work, so he used his feet. He dashed to the right, ducking under the shadowy giant's grasping hands, and burst through the nearest doorway. Suddenly he found himself at Camp Half-Blood, except the camp was in ruins. The cabins were charred husks, burnt fields smouldered in the moonlight. The dining pavilion had collapsed into a pile of white rubble, and the big house was on fire, its windows glowing like demon eyes. Leo kept running, sure the shadow giant was still behind him. He weaved around the bodies of Greek and Roman demigods. He wanted to check if they were alive. He wanted to help them, but somehow he knew he was running out of time. He jogged towards the only living people he saw, a group of Romans standing at the volleyball pit. 2 centurions leaned casually on their javelins, chatting with tall, skinny blonde guy in a purple toga. Leo stumbled. It was that freak Octavian, the augur from Camp Jupiter, who was always screaming for war. Octavian turned to face him, but he seemed to be in a trance. His features were slack, his eyes closed. When he spoke, it was in Gaia's voice. "This cannot be prevented. The Romans move east from New York. They advance on your camp, and nothing can slow them down." Leo was tempted to punch Octavian in the face. Instead, he kept running. He climbed Camp Half-Blood Hill. At the summit, lightning had splintered the giant pine tree. He faltered to a stop. The back of the hill was shorn away. Beyond it, the entire world was gone. Leo saw nothing but clouds far below, a rolling silver carpet under the dark sky. A sharp voice said, "Well?" Leo flinched. At the shattered pine tree, a woman knelt at a cave entrance that had cracked open between the tree's roots. The woman wasn't Gaia. She looked more like a living Athena Parthenos, with the same golden robes and bare ivory arms. When she rose, Leo almost stumbled off the edge of the world. Her face was regally beautiful, with high cheekbones, large dark eyes, and braided licorice-coloured hair piled in a fancy Greek hairdo, set with a spiral of emeralds and diamonds so that it reminded Leo of a Christmas tree. Her expression radiated pure hatred. Her lip curled, her nose wrinkled. "The tinkerer god's child," she sneered. "You are no threat, but I suppose my vengeance must start somewhere. Make your choice." Leo tried to speak, but he was about to crawl out of his skin with panic. Between this hate queen and the giant chasing him, he had no idea what to do. "He'll be here soon," the woman warned. "My dark friend will not give you the luxury of a choice. It's the cliff or the cave, boy." Suddenly, Leo understood what she meant. He was cornered. He could jump off the cliff, but that was suicide. Even if there was land under those clouds, he would die in the fall. Or maybe he would just keep falling forever. But the cave. He stared at the dark opening between the tree roots. It smelled of rot and death. He heard bodies shuffling inside, voices whispering in the shadows. The cave was the home of the dead. If he went down there, he would never come back. "Yes," the woman said. Around her neck hung a strange bronze and emerald pendant, like a circular labyrinth. Her eyes were so angry, Leo finally understood why mad was a word for crazy. This lady had been driven nuts by hatred. "The house of Hades awaits. You will be the first puny rodent to die in my maze. You have only one chance to escape, Leo Valdez. Take it." She gestured towards the cliff. "You're bonkers," he managed. That was the wrong thing to say. She seized his wrist. "Perhaps I should kill you now before my dark friend arrives." Steps shook the hillside. The giant was coming, wrapped in shadows, huge and heavy and bent on murder. "Have you heard of dying in a dream, boy?" the woman asked. "It is possible, at the hands of a sorceress." Leo's arm started to smoke. The woman's touch was acid. He tried to free himself, but her grip was like steel. He opened his mouth to scream. The massive shape of the giant loomed over him, obscured by layers of black smoke. The giant raised his fist, and a voice cut through the dream. "Leo!" Jason was shaking his shoulder. "Hey man, why are you hugging Nike?" Leo's eyes fluttered open. His arms were wrapped around the human-sized statue in Athena's hand. He must have been thrashing in his sleep. He clung to the victory goddess like he used to cling to his pillow when he had nightmares as a kid. Man, that had been so embarrassing in the foster homes. He disentangled himself and sat up, rubbing his face. "Nothing," he muttered. "We were just cuddling. What's going on?" Jason didn't tease him. That's one thing Leo appreciated about his friend. Jason's ice-blue eyes were level and serious. The little scar on his mouth twitched like it always did when he had bad news to share. "We made it through the mountains," he said. "We're almost to Bologna. You should join us in the mess hall. Nico has new information." Chapter 10. Leo. Leo had designed the mess hall's walls to show real-time scenes from Camp Half-Blood. At first he thought that was a pretty awesome idea. Now he wasn't so sure. The scenes from back home, the campfire sing-alongs, dinners at the pavilion, volleyball games outside the big house just seemed to make his friends sad. The further they got from Long Island, the worse it got. The time zones kept changing, making Leo feel the distance every time he looked at the walls. Here in Italy, the sun had just come up. Back at Camp Half-Blood, it was the middle of the night. Torches sputtered at the cabin doorways. Moonlight glittered on the waves of Long Island Sound. The beach was covered in footprints, as if a big crowd had just left. With a start, Leo realised that yesterday, last night, whatever, had been the 4th of July. They'd missed Camp Half-Blood's annual party at the beach with awesome fireworks prepared by Leo's siblings in Cabin 9. He decided not to mention that to the crew, but he hoped their buddies back home had a good celebration. They needed something to keep their spirits up too. He remembered the images he'd seen in his dream, the camp in ruins, littered with bodies, Octavian standing at the volleyball pit, casually talking in Gaia's voice. He stared down at his eggs and bacon. He wished he could turn off the wall videos. So, Jason said, now that we're here. He sat at the head of the table, kind of by default. Since they'd lost Annabeth, Jason had done his best to act as the group's leader. Having been praetor back at Camp Jupiter, he was probably used to that. But Leo could tell his friend was stressed. His eyes were more sunken than usual. His blonde hair was uncharacteristically messy, like he'd forgotten to comb it. Leo glanced at the others around the table. Hazel was bleary-eyed too, but of course she'd been up all night guiding the ship through the mountains. Her curly cinnamon-coloured hair was tied back in a bandana, which gave her a commando look that Leo found kind of hot, and then immediately felt guilty about. Next to her sat her boyfriend, Frank Zhang, dressed in black workout pants and a Roman tourist t-shirt that said, Ciao. Was that even a word? Frank's old Centurion badge was pinned to his shirt, despite the fact that the demigods of the Argo II were now public enemies numbers 1 through 7 back at Camp Jupiter. His grim expression just reinforced his unfortunate resemblance to a sumo wrestler. Then there was Hazel's half-brother, Nico D'Angelo. Dang, that kid gave Leo the freaky deakies. He sat back in his leather aviator jacket, his black t-shirt and jeans, that wicked silver skull ring on his finger, and the Stygian sword at his side. His tufts of black hair stuck up in curls like baby bat wings. His eyes were sad, kind of empty, as if he'd stared into the depths of Tartarus, which he had. The only absent demigod was Piper, who was taking her turn at the helm with Coach Hedge, their satyr chaperone. Leo wished Piper were here. She had a way of calming things down with that Aphrodite charm of hers. After his dreams last night, Leo could use some calm. On the other hand, it was probably good she was above deck chaperoning their chaperone. Now that they were in the ancient lands, they had to be constantly on guard. Leo was nervous about letting Coach Hedge fly solo. The satyr was a little trigger-happy, and the helm had plenty of bright, dangerous buttons that could cause the picturesque Italian villages below them to go boom. Leo had zoned out so totally he didn't realise Jason was still talking. The House of Hades, he was saying. Nico? Nico sat forward. I communed with the dead last night. He just tossed that line out there like he was saying he got a text from a buddy. I was able to learn more about what we'll face, Nico continued. In ancient times, the House of Hades was a major site for Greek pilgrims. They would come to speak with the dead and honour their ancestors. Leo frowned. Sounds like Dia de los Muertos. My Aunt Rosa took that stuff seriously. He remembered being dragged by her to the local cemetery in Houston, where they'd clean up their relatives' grave sites and put out offerings of lemonade, cookies, and fresh marigolds. Aunt Rosa would force Leo to stare and stay for a picnic, as if hanging out with dead people were good for his appetite. Frank grunted. Chinese have that too, ancestor worship, sweeping the graves in the springtime. He glanced at Leo. Your Aunt Rosa would have got along with my grandmother. Leo had a terrifying image of his Aunt Rosa and some old Chinese woman in wrestlers' outfits, wailing on each other with spiked clubs. Yeah, Leo said. I'm sure they would have been best buds. Nico cleared his throat. A lot of cultures have seasonal traditions to honour the dead, but the House of Hades was open year-round. Pilgrims could actually speak to the ghosts. In Greek, the place was called the Necromantium, the Oracle of Death. You'd work your way through different levels of tunnels, leaving offerings and drinking special potions. Special potions, Leo muttered. Yum. Jason flashed him a look like, dude, enough. Nico, go on. The pilgrims believed that each level of the temple brought you closer to the underworld until the dead would appear before you. If they were pleased with your offerings, they would answer your questions, maybe even tell you the future. Frank tapped his mug of hot chocolate. And if the spirits weren't pleased? Some pilgrims found nothing. Nico said. Some went insane or died after leaving the temple. Others lost their way in the tunnels and were never seen again. The point is, Jason said quickly, Nico found some information that might help us. Yeah, Nico didn't sound very enthusiastic. The ghost I spoke to last night. He was a former priest of Hecate. He confirmed what the goddess told Hazel yesterday at the crossroads. In the first war with the giants, Hecate fought for the gods. She slew one of the giants, one who'd been designed as the anti-Hecate, a guy named Clytius. Dark dude, Leo guessed, wrapped in shadows. Hazel turned towards him, her gold eyes narrowing. Leo, how did you know that? Kind of had a dream. No one looked surprised. Most demigods had vivid nightmares about what was going on in the world. His friends paid close attention as Leo explained. He tried not to look at the wall images of Camp Half-Blood as he described the place in ruins. He told them about the dark giant and the strange woman on Half-Blood Hill, offering him a multiple-choice death. Jason pushed away his plate of pancakes. So, the giant is Clytius. I suppose he'll be waiting for us, guarding the doors of death. Frank rolled up one of the pancakes and started munching. Not a guy to let impending death stand in the way of a hearty breakfast. And the woman in Leo's dream? She's my problem. Hazel passed a diamond between her fingers in a sleight of hand. Hecate mentioned a formidable enemy in the House of Hades, a witch who couldn't be defeated except by me, using magic. Do you know magic? Leo asked. Not yet. Ah. He tried to think of something helpful to say, but he recalled the angry woman's eyes, the way her steely grip made his skin smoke. Any idea who she is? Hazel shook her head. Only that. She glanced at Nico, and then some sort of silent argument happened between them. Leo got the feeling that the two of them had had private conversations about the House of Hades, and they weren't sharing all the details. Only that she won't be easy to defeat. But there is some good news, Nico said. The ghost I talked to explained how Hecate defeated Clytius in the First War. She used her torches to set his hair on fire. He burned to death. In other words, fire is his weakness. Everybody looked at Leo. Oh, he said. Okay. Jason nodded encouragingly, like this was great news, like he expected Leo to walk up to a towering mass of darkness, shoot a few fireballs and solve all their problems. Leo didn't want to bring him down, but he could still hear Gaia's voice. He is the void that consumes all magic, the cold that consumes all fire, the silence that consumes all speech. Leo was pretty sure it would take more than a few matches to set that giant ablaze. It's a good lead, Jason insisted. At least we know how to kill the giant. And this sorceress, well, if Hecate believes Hazel can defeat her, then so do I. Hazel dropped her eyes. Now we just have to reach the House of Hades, battle our way through Gaia's forces, plus a bunch of ghosts, Nico added grimly. The spirits in that temple may not be friendly. And find the doors of death, Hazel continued, assuming we can somehow arrive at the same time as Percy and Annabeth and rescue them. Frank swallowed a bite of pancake. We can do it. We have to. Leo admired the big guy's optimism. He wished he shared it. So, with this detour, Leo said, I'm estimating 4 or 5 days to arrive at Epirus, assuming no delays for, monster attacks and stuff. Jason smiled sourly. Yeah, those never happen. Leo looked at Hazel. Hecate told you that Gaia was planning her big wake-up party on August 1st, right? The Feast of whatever? Spes, Hazel said, the goddess of hope. Jason turned his fork. Theoretically, that leaves us enough time. It's only July 5th. We should be able to close the doors of death, then find the giants, HQ, and stop them from waking Gaia from before August 1st. Theoretically, Hazel agreed. But I'd still like to know how we make our way through the House of Hades without going insane or dying. Nobody volunteered any ideas. Frank set down his pancake roll like it suddenly didn't taste so good. It's July 5th. Oh, geez, I hadn't even thought of that. Hey, man, it's cool, Leo said. You're Canadian, right? I didn't expect you to get me an Independence Day present or anything, unless you wanted to. It's not that. My grandmother, she always told me that 7 was an unlucky number. It was a ghost number. She didn't like it when I told her there would be 7 demigods on our quest, and July is the 7th month. Yeah, but... Leo tapped his fingers nervously on the table. He realised he was doing the Morse code for I love you, the way he used to do with his mum, which would have been pretty embarrassing if his friends understood Morse code. But that's just coincidence, right? Frank's expression didn't reassure him. Back in China, Frank said, in the old days, people called the 7th month the ghost month. That's when the spirit world and the human world were closest. The living and the dead could go back and forth. Tell me it's a coincidence we're searching for the doors of death during the ghost month? No one spoke. Leo wanted to think that an old Chinese belief couldn't have anything to do with the Romans and the Greeks. Totally different, right? But Frank's existence was proof that the cultures were tied together. The Zhang family went all the way back to ancient Greece. They'd found their way through Rome and China and finally to Canada. Also, Leo kept thinking about his meeting with the revenge goddess Nemesis at the Great Salt Lake. Nemesis had called him the seventh wheel, the odd man out on the quest. She didn't mean seventh as in ghost, did she? Jason pressed his hands against the arms of his chair. Let's focus on the things we can deal with. We're getting close to Bologna. Maybe we'll get more answers once we find those dwarfs that Hecate... The ship lurched as if it had been hit by an iceberg. Leo's breakfast plate slid across the table. Nico fell backwards, but out of his chair, and banged his head against the sideboard. He collapsed on the floor with a dozen magic goblets and platters crashing down on top of him. Nico! Hazel ran to help him. What? Frank tried to stand, but the ship pitched in the other direction. He stumbled into the table and went face first into Leo's plate of scrambled eggs. Look! Jason pointed at the walls. The images of Camp Half-Blood were flickering and changing. Not possible, Leo murmured. No way those enchantments could show anything other than scenes from camp. But suddenly, a huge, distorted face filled the entire portside wall. Crooked yellow teeth, a scraggly red beard, a warty nose, and two mismatched eyes. One much larger and higher than the other. The face seemed to be trying to eat its way into the room. The other walls flickered, showing scenes from above deck. Piper stood at the helm, but something was wrong. From the shoulders down, she was wrapped in duct tape, her mouth gagged and her legs bound to the control console. At the main mast, Coach Hedge was similarly bound and gagged, while a bizarre-looking creature, a sort of gnome-chimpanzee combo with poor fashion sense, danced around him, doing the coach's hair in tiny pigtails with pink rubber bands. On the portside wall, the huge, ugly face receded so that Leo could see the entire creature. Another gnome chimp, in even crazier clothes. This one began leaping around the deck, stuffing things into a burlap bag. Piper's dagger, Leo's Wii controllers. Then he prized the Archimedes sphere out of the command console. No! Leo yelled. Ah! Nico groaned from the floor. Piper! Jason cried. Monkey! Frank yelled. Not monkeys, Hazel grumbled. I think those are dwarfs. Stealing my stuff, Leo yelled, and he ran for the stairs. Chapter 11. Leo. Leo was vaguely aware of Hazel shouting, Go! I'll take care of Nico, as if Leo was going to turn back. Sure, he'd hoped D'Angelo was okay, but he had headaches of his own. Leo bounded up the steps with Jason and Frank behind him. The situation on deck was even worse than he'd feared. Coach Hedge and Piper were struggling against their duct tape bonds, while one of the demon monkey dwarfs danced around the deck, picking up whatever wasn't tied down and sticking it in his bag. He was maybe 4 feet tall, even shorter than Coach Hedge, with bowed legs and chimp-like feet. His clothes so loud they gave Leo vertigo. His green plaid trousers were pinned at the cuffs and held up with bright red suspenders over a striped pink and black woman's blouse. He wore half a dozen gold watches on each arm and a zebra-patterned cowboy hat with a price tag dangling from the brim. His skin was covered with patches of scraggly red fur, though 90% of his body hair seemed to be concentrated in his magnificent eyebrows. Leo was just forming the thought, Where's the other dwarf? When he heard a click behind him and realised he led his friends into a trap. Duck! He hit the deck as the explosion blasted his eardrums. Note to self, Leo thought groggily, do not leave boxes of magic grenades where dwarfs can reach them. At least he was alive. Leo had been experimenting with all sorts of weapons, based on the Archimedes sphere that he'd recovered in Rome. He'd built grenades that could spray acid, fire, shrapnel, or freshly buttered popcorn. Hey, you never knew when you'd get hungry in battle. Judging from the ringing in Leo's ears, the dwarf had detonated the flashbang grenade, which Leo had filled with a rare vial of Apollo's music, pure liquid extract. It didn't kill, but it left Leo feeling like he'd just done a belly flop off the deep end. He tried to get up. His limbs were useless. Someone was tugging at his waist, maybe a friend trying to help him up. No, his friends didn't smell like heavily perfumed monkey cages. He managed to turn over. His vision was out of focus and tinted pink, like the world had been submerged in strawberry jelly. A grinning, grotesque face loomed over him. The brown-furred dwarf was dressed even worse than his friend, in a green bowler hat like a leprechaun's, dangly diamond earrings, and a white and black referee shirt. He showed off the prize he'd just stolen, Leo's tool belt, and then danced away. Leo tried to grab him, but his fingers were numb. The dwarf frolicked over to the nearest ballista, which his red-furred friend was priming to launch. The brown-furred dwarf jumped onto the projectile like it was a skateboard, and his friend shot him into the sky. Red Fur pranced over to Coach Hedge. He gave the satyr a big smack on the cheek and then skipped to the rail. He bowed to Leo, doffing his zebra cowboy hat, and did a backflip over the side. Leo managed to get up. Jason was already on his feet, stumbling and running into things. Frank had turned into a silverback gorilla. Why, Leo wasn't sure. Maybe to commune with the monkey dwarfs? But the flash grenade had hit him hard. He was sprawled on the deck with his tongue hanging out and his gorilla eyes rolled up in his head. Piper! Jason staggered to the helm and carefully pulled the gag out of her mouth. Don't waste your time on me, she said. Go after them. At the mast, Coach Hedge mumbled. Leo figured that meant kill them. Easy translation, since most of the coach's sentences involved the word kill. Leo glanced at the control console. His Archimedes sphere was gone. He put his hand to his waist where his tool belt should have been. His head started to clear, and his sense of outrage came to a boil. Those dwarfs had attacked his ship. They'd stolen his most precious possessions. Below him spread the city of Bologna, a jigsaw puzzle of red tile buildings in a valley hemmed in by green hills. Unless Leo could find the dwarfs somewhere in that maze of streets. Nope, failure wasn't an option. Neither was waiting for his friends to recover. He turned to Jason. You feeling good enough to control the winds? I need a lift. Jason frowned. Sure, but, good, Leo said. We've got some monkey dudes to catch. Jason and Leo touched down in a big piazza lined with a white marble government building and outdoor cafes. Bikes and Vespers clogged the surrounding streets, but the square itself was empty except for pigeons and a few old men drinking espressos. None of the locals seemed to notice the huge Greek warship hovering over the piazza, nor the fact that Jason and Leo had just flown down, Jason wielding a gold sword, and Leo pretty much empty-handed. Where to? Jason asked. Leo stared at him. Well, I dunno. Let me pull my dwarf tracking GPS out of my tool belt. Oh, wait, I don't have a dwarf tracking GPS or my tool belt. Fine, Jason grumbled. He glanced up at the ship as if to get his bearings, and then pointed across the piazza. The ballista fired the first dwarf in that direction, I think. Come on. They waded through a lake of pigeons, then manoeuvred down a side street of clothing stores and gelato shops. The sidewalks were lined with white columns covered in graffiti. A few panhandlers asked for change. Leo didn't know Italian, but he had got the message loud and clear. He kept patting his waist, hoping his tool belt would magically reappear. It didn't. He tried not to freak, but he'd come to depend on that belt for almost everything. He felt like somebody had stolen one of his hands. We'll find it, Jason promised. Usually, Leo would have felt reassured. Jason had a talent for staying level-headed in a crisis, and he'd got Leo out of plenty of bad scrapes. Today, though, all Leo could think about was the stupid fortune cookie he had opened in Rome. The goddess Nemesis had promised him help, and he'd got it, the code to activate the Archimedes sphere. At the time, Leo had no choice but to use it if he wanted to save his friends, but Nemesis had warned that her help came with a price. Leo wondered if that price would ever be paid. Percy and Annabeth were gone, the ship was hundreds of miles off course, heading towards an impossible challenge. Leo's friends were counting on him to beat a terrifying giant, and now he didn't have his tool belt or his Archimedes sphere. He was so absorbed with feeling sorry for himself that he didn't notice where they were until Jason grabbed his arm. Check it out. Leo looked up. They'd arrived in a smaller piazza. Looming over them was a huge bronze statue of a buck-naked Neptune. Ah, jeez. Leo averted his eyes. He really didn't need to see a godly groin this early in the morning. The sea god stood on a big marble column in the middle of a fountain that wasn't working, which seemed kind of ironic. On either side of Neptune, little winged Cupid dudes were sitting, kind of chilling like. What's up? Neptune himself, avoid the groin, was throwing his hip to one side in an Elvis Presley move. He gripped his trident loosely in his right hand and stretched his left hand out like he was blessing Leo, or possibly attempting to levitate him. Some kind of clue? Leo wondered. Jason frowned. Maybe, maybe not. There are statues of the gods all over the place in Italy. I'd just feel better if we ran across Jupiter, or Minerva, anybody but Neptune, really. Leo climbed into the dry fountain. He put his hand on the statue's pedestal, and a rush of impressions surged through his fingertips. He sensed celestial bronze gears, magical levers, springs and pistons. It's mechanical, he said. Maybe a doorway to the dwarf's secret lair? Ooh, shrieked a nearby voice. Secret lair? I want a secret lair, yelled another voice from above. Jason stepped back, his sword ready. Leo almost got whiplash trying to look in two places at once. The red-furred dwarf in the cowboy hat was sitting about 30 feet away at the nearest cafe table, sipping an espresso, held by his monkey-like foot. The brown-furred dwarf in the green bowler was perched on the marble pedestal at Neptune's feet, just above Leo's head. If we had a secret lair, said Red Fur, I would want a firehouse pole. And a water slide, said Brown Fur, who was pulling random tools out of Leo's belt, tossing aside wrenches, hammers and staple guns. Stop that! Leo tried to grab the dwarf's feet, but he couldn't reach the top of the pedestal. Too short? Brown Fur sympathized. You're calling me short? Leo looked around for something to throw, but there was nothing but pigeons, and he doubted he could catch one. Give me my belt, you stupid! Now, said Brown Fur. We haven't even introduced ourselves. I'm Akmon, and my brother over there is the handsome one. The red-furred dwarf lifted his espresso. Judging from his dilated eyes and his maniacal grin, he didn't need any more caffeine. Passalos, singer of songs, drinker of coffee, stealer of shiny stuff. Please, shrieked his brother. Akmon, I steal much better than you. Passalos snorted. Stealing naps, maybe. He took a knife, Piper's knife, and started picking his teeth with it. Hey, Jason yelled. That's my girlfriend's knife. He lunged at Passalos, but the red-furred dwarf was too quick. He sprang from his chair, bounced off Jason's head, did a flip and landed next to Leo, his hairy arms around Leo's waist. Save me! The dwarf pleaded. Get off! Leo tried to shove him away, but Passalos did a backward somersault and landed out of reach. Leo's trousers promptly fell around his knees. He stared at Passalos, who was now grinning and holding a small zigzaggy strip of metal. Somehow the dwarf had stolen the zipper right off Leo's trousers. Give, stupid zipper! Leo stuttered, trying to shake his fist and hoist up the trousers at the same time. Hey, not so shiny enough! Passalos tossed it away. Jason lunged with his sword. Passalos launched himself straight up and was suddenly sitting on the statue's pedestal next to his brother. Tell me I don't have moves, Passalos boasted. Okay, Akmon said. You don't have moves. Bah, Passalos said. Give me the tool belt. I want to see. No, Akmon elbowed him away. You got the knife and the shiny ball. Yes, the shiny ball is nice. Passalos took off his cowboy hat. Like a magician producing a rabbit, he pulled out the Archimedes sphere and began tinkering with the ancient bronze dials. Stop! Leo yelled. That's a delicate machine. Jason came to his side and glared up at the dwarfs. Who are you two, anyway? The Cacopes! Akmon narrowed his eyes at Jason. I bet you're son of Jupiter, eh? I can always tell. Just like Black Bottom, Passalos agreed. Black Bottom? Leo resisted the urge to jump at the dwarf's feet again. He was sure Passalos was going to ruin the Archimedes sphere any second now. Yes, you know, Akmon grinned. Hercules! We call him Black Bottom because he used to go around without clothes. He got so tanned that his backside, well, at least he had a sense of humour, Passalos said. He was going to kill us when we stole from him, but he let us go because he liked our jokes. Not like you two, grumpy. Hey, I've got a sense of humour, Leo snarled. Give me back our stuff, and I'll tell you a joke with a good punchline. Nice try. Akmon pulled a ratchet wrench from the tool belt and spun it like a noisemaker. Oh, very nice. I'm definitely keeping this. Thanks, Blue Bottom. Blue Bottom. Leo glanced down. His trousers had slipped around his ankles again, revealing his blue boxer shorts. That's it, he shouted. My stuff, now, or I'll show you how funny a flaming dwarf is. His hands caught fire. Now we're talking. Jason thrust his sword into the sky. Dark clouds began to gather over the piazza. Thunder boomed. Oh, scary, Akmon shrieked. Yes, Passalos agreed. If only we had a secret lair to hide in. Alas, this statue isn't the doorway to a secret lair, Akmon said. It has a different purpose. Leo's gut twisted. The fires died in his hands, and he realised something was very wrong. He yelled, Trap! And dived out of the fountain. Unfortunately, Jason was too busy summoning his storm. Leo rolled on his back as 5 golden cords shot from the Neptune statue's fingers. One barely missed Leo's feet. The rest honed in on Jason, wrapping him like a rodeo calf and yanking him upside down. A bolt of lightning blasted the tines of Neptune's trident, sending arcs of electricity up and down the statue, but the Cacopes had already disappeared. Bravo! Akmon applauded from a nearby cafe table. You make a wonderful piñata, son of Jupiter. Yes, Passalos agreed. Hercules hung us upside down once, you know. Oh, revenge is sweet. Leo summoned a fireball. He lobbed it at Passalos, who was trying to juggle 2 pigeons and the Archimedes sphere. Eek! The dwarf jumped free of the explosion, dropping the sphere and letting the pigeons fly. Time to leave, Akmon decided. He tripped his bowler and sprang away. Jumping from table to table, Passalos glanced at the Archimedes sphere, which had rolled between Leo's feet. Leo summoned another fireball. "Try me," he snarled. "Bye!" Passalos did a backflip and ran after his brother. Leo scooped up the Archimedes sphere and ran over to Jason, who was still hanging upside down, thoroughly hog-tied except for his sword arm. He was trying to cut the cords with his gold blade, but having no luck. "Hold on," Leo said. "If I can find a release switch." "Just go," Jason growled. "I'll follow you when I get out of this. But don't lose them." The last thing Leo wanted was some alone time with the monkey dwarfs, but the Cacopes were already disappearing around the far corner of the piazza. Leo left Jason hanging and ran after them. Chapter 12. Leo. The dwarfs didn't try very hard to lose him, which made Leo suspicious. They stayed just at the edge of his vision, scampering over red-tiled rooftops, knocking over window boxes, whooping and hollering and leaving a trail of screws and nails from Leo's tool belt, almost as if they wanted Leo to follow. He jogged after them, cursing every time his trousers fell down. He turned a corner and saw two ancient stone towers jutting into the sky, side by side, much taller than anything else in the neighbourhood. Maybe medieval watchtowers? They leaned in different directions like gear shifts on a race car. The Cacopes scaled the tower on the right. When they reached the top, they climbed around the back and disappeared. Had they gone inside? Leo could see some tiny windows at the top, covered with metal grates, but he doubted those would stop the dwarfs. He watched for a minute, but the Cacopes didn't reappear, which meant Leo had to get up there and look for them. "Great," he muttered. No flying friend to carry him up. The ship was too far away to call for help. He could rig the Archimedes sphere to come into some sort of flying device, maybe, but only if he had his tool belt, which he didn't. He scanned the neighbourhood, trying to think. Half a block down, a set of double glass doors opened, and an old lady hobbled out, carrying plastic shopping bags. A grocery store? Leo patted his pockets. To his amazement, he still had some euro notes from his time in Rome. Those stupid dwarfs had taken everything except his money. He ran for the store as fast as his zipperless trousers allowed. Leo scoured the aisles, looking for things he could use. He didn't know the Italian for hello. "Where are your dangerous chemicals, please?" But that was probably just as well. He didn't want to end up in an Italian jail. Fortunately, he didn't need to read labels. He could tell just from picking up a toothpaste tube whether it contained potassium nitrate. He found charcoal. He found sugar and baking soda. The store sold matches and bug spray and aluminium foil. Pretty much everything he needed, plus a laundry cord he could use as a belt. He added some Italian junk food to the basket, just to sort of disguise his more suspicious purchases, and then dumped his stuff at the till. A wide-eyed checkout lady asked him some questions he didn't understand, but he managed to pay, get a bag and race out. He ducked into the nearest doorway where he could keep an eye on the towers. He started to work, summoning fire to dry out materials and do a little cooking that otherwise would have taken days to complete. Every once in a while he sneaked to look at the tower, but there was no sign of the dwarfs. Leo could only hope they were still up there, making his arsenal it took just a few minutes. He was that good, but it felt like hours. Jason didn't show. Maybe he was still tangled at the Neptune fountain or scouring the streets looking for Leo. No one else from the ship came to help. Probably it was taking them a long time to get all those pink rubber bands out of Coach Hedges' hair. That meant Leo had only himself, his bag of junk food, and a few highly improvised weapons made from sugar and toothpaste. Oh, and the Archimedes sphere. That was kind of important. He hoped he hadn't ruined it by filling it with chemical powder. He ran to the tower and found the entrance. He started up the winding stairs inside, only to be stopped at a ticket booth by some caretaker who yelled at him in Italian. "Seriously?" Leo asked. "Look, man, you've got dwarfs in your belfry. I'm the exterminator." He held up his can of bug spray. "See? Exterminator, molto buono. Squirt, squirt. Ah!" He pantomimed a dwarf melting in terror, which for some reason the Italian didn't seem to understand. The guy just held out his palm for money. "Dang, man," Leo grumbled. "I just spent all my cash on homemade explosives and whatnot." He dug around in his grocery bag. "Don't suppose you'd accept, whatever these are?" Leo held up a yellow and red bag of junk food called Fonzie's. He assumed they were some kind of potato chips. To his surprise, the caretaker shrugged and took the bag. "Avanti!" Leo kept climbing, but he made a mental note to stock up on Fonzie's. Apparently they were better than cash in Italy. The stairs went on and on and on. The whole tower seemed to be nothing but an excuse to build a staircase. He stopped on a landing and slumped against a narrow barred window, trying to catch his breath. He was sweating like crazy, and his heart thumped against his ribs. Stupid Cacopes. Leo figured that as soon as he reached the top, they would jump away before he could use his weapons. But he had to try. He kept climbing. Finally, his legs feeling like overcooked noodles, he reached the top. The room was about the size of a broom closet, with barred windows on all four walls. Shoved in the corners were sacks of treasure, shiny goodies spilling all over the floor. Leo spotted Piper's knife, an old leather-bound book, a few interesting-looking mechanical devices, and enough gold to give Hazel's horse a stomachache. At first, he thought the dwarves had left. Then he looked up. Akmon and Passalos were hanging upside down from the rafters by their chimp feet, playing anti-gravity poker. When they saw Leo, they threw their cards like confetti and broke out in applause. "I told you he'd do it!" Akmon shrieked in delight. Passalos shrugged and took off one of his gold watches and handed it to his brother. "You win! I didn't think he was that dumb!" They both dropped to the floor. Akmon was wearing Leo's tool belt. He was so close that Leo had to resist the urge to lunge for it. Passalos straightened his cowboy hat and kicked open the grate on the nearest window. "What should we make him climb next, brother? The dome of San Luca?" Leo wanted to throttle the dwarfs, but he forced a smile. "Oh, that sounds fun, but before you guys go, you forgot something shiny." "Impossible," Akmon scowled. "We are very thorough." "You sure?" Leo held up his grocery bag. The dwarfs inched closer. As Leo had hoped, their curiosity was so strong that they couldn't resist. "Look!" Leo brought out his first weapon, a lump of dried chemicals wrapped in aluminium foil, and lit it with his hand. He knew enough to turn away when it popped, but the dwarfs were staring right at it. Toothpaste, sugar and bug spray weren't as good as Apollo's music, but they made a pretty decent flash bang. The Cacopes wailed, clawing at their eyes. They stumbled towards the window, but Leo set off his homemade firecrackers, snapping them around the dwarfs' bare feet to keep them off balance. Then, for good measure, Leo turned the dial on his Archimedes sphere, which unleashed a plume of foul white fog that filled the room. Leo wasn't bothered by smoke. Being immune to fire, he'd stood in smoky bonfires, endured dragon breath, and cleaned out blazing forges plenty of times. While the dwarfs were hacking and wheezing, he grabbed his tool belt from Akmon, calmly summoned some bungee cords and tied up the dwarfs. "My eyes!" Akmon coughed. "My tool belt!" "My feet are on fire!" Passalos wailed. Not shiny at all." After making sure they were securely bound, Leo dragged the Cacopes into one corner and began rifling through their treasures. He retrieved Piper's dagger, a few of his prototype grenades, and a dozen other odds and ends the dwarfs had taken from the Argo too. "Please," Akmon wailed, "don't take our shinies." "We'll make you a deal," Passalos suggested. "We'll cut you in for 10% if you let us go." "Afraid not," Leo muttered. "It's all mine now." 20%. Just then, thunder boomed overhead. Lightning flashed, and the bars on the nearest window burst into sizzling, melted stubs of iron. Jason flew in like Peter Pan, electricity sparking around him, and his gold sword streaming. Leo whistled appreciatively. "Man, you just wasted an awesome entrance." Jason frowned. He noticed the hog-tied Cacopes. "What the—" "All by myself," Leo said. "I'm special that way. How did you find me?" The smoke," Jason managed. "And I heard popping noises. Were you having a gunfight in here?" "Something like that." Leo tossed him Piper's dagger and then kept rummaging through the bags of dwarf shinies. He remembered what Hazel had said about finding a treasure that would help them with the quest, but he wasn't sure what he was looking for. There were coins, gold nuggets, jewellery, paper clips, foil wrappers, cufflinks. He kept coming back to a couple of things that didn't seem to belong. One was an old bronze navigation device, like an astrolabe from a ship. It was badly damaged and seemed to be missing some pieces, but Leo still found it fascinating. "Take it," Passalos offered. "Odysseus made it, you know. Take it and let us go." "Odysseus?" Jason asked. "Like the Odysseus?" "Yes," Passalos squeaked. "Made it when he was an old man in Ithaca. One of his last inventions, and we stole it." "How does it work?" Leo asked. "Oh, it doesn't," Akmon said. "Something about a missing crystal." He glanced at his brother for help. "My biggest what if," Passalos said. "Should have taken a crystal." That's what he kept muttering in his sleep. "The night we stole it." Passalos shrugged. "No idea what he meant, but the shiny is yours. Can we go now?" Leo wasn't sure why he wanted the astrolabe. It was obviously broken, and he didn't get the sense that this was what Hecate meant them to find. Still, he slipped it into one of his tool belt's magic pockets. He turned his attention to the other strange piece of loot, the leather-bound book. Its title was in gold leaf, in a language Leo couldn't understand, but nothing else about the book seemed shiny. He didn't figure the Cacopes for being big readers. "What's this?" He wagged it at the dwarfs, who were still teary-eyed from the smoke. "Nothing," Akmon said. "Just a book. It had a pretty gold cover, so we took it from him." "Him?" Leo asked. Akmon and Passalos exchanged a nervous look. "Minor god," Passalos said. "In Venice. Really, it's nothing." "Venice?" Jason frowned at Leo. Isn't that where we're supposed to go next? Yeah. Leo examined the book. He couldn't read the text, but it had lots of illustrations, scythes, different plants, a picture of the sun, a team of oxen pulling a cart. He didn't see how any of that was important, but if the book had been stolen from a minor god in Venice, the next place Hecate had told them to visit, then this had to be what they were looking for. Where exactly can we find this minor god? Leo asked. No, Akmon shrieked. You can't take it back to him. If he finds out we stole it, he'll destroy you, Jason guessed. Which is what we'll do if you don't tell us, and we're a lot closer. He pressed the point of his sword against Akmon's furry throat. Okay, the dwarf shrieked. La Casanera, Calafretzeria. Is that an address? Leo asked. The dwarfs both nodded vigorously. Please don't tell him we stole it, Passalos begged. He isn't nice at all. Who is he? Jason asked. What god? I can't say, Passalos stammered. You'd better, Leo warned. No, Passalos said miserably. I mean, I really can't say. I can't pronounce it. Try. It's too hard. Akmon said. Truto? Too many syllables. They both burst into tears. Leo didn't know if the Kokopes were telling them the truth, but it was hard to stay mad at weeping dwarfs, no matter how annoying and badly dressed they were. Jason lowered his sword. What do you want to do with them, Leo? Send them to Tartarus? Please, no, Akmon wailed. It might take us weeks to come back. Assuming Gaia even lets us, Passalos sniffled. She controls the doors of death now. She'll be very cross with us. Leo looked at the dwarfs. He'd fought lots of monsters before and never felt bad about dissolving them, but this was different. He had to admit he sort of admired these little guys. They played cool pranks and liked shiny things. Leo could relate. Besides, Percy and Annabeth were in Tartarus right now, hopefully still alive, trudging towards the doors of death. The idea of sending these twin monkey boys there to face the same nightmarish problem, well, it didn't seem right. He imagined Gaia laughing at his weakness, a demigod too soft-hearted to kill monsters. He remembered his dream about Camp Half-Blood in ruins, Greek and Roman bodies littering the fields. He remembered Octavian speaking with the Earth Goddess's voice. The Romans move east from New York. They advance on your camp and nothing can slow them down. Nothing can slow them down, Leo mused. I wonder. What? Jason asked. Leo looked at the dwarfs. I'll make you a deal. Akmon's eyes lit up. 30%? We'll leave you all your treasure, Leo said, except the stuff that belongs to us and the astrolabe in this book, which we'll take back to the dude in Venice. But he'll destroy us, Passalos wailed. We won't say where we got it, Leo promised, and we won't kill you. We'll let you go free. Leo? Jason asked nervously. Akmon squealed with delight. I knew you were as smart as Hercules. I will call you Blackbottom, the sequel. Yeah, no thanks, Leo said. But in return for us sparing your lives, you have to do something for us. I'm going to send you somewhere to steal from some people, harass them, make life hard for them, any way you can. You have to follow my directions exactly. You have to swear on the river Styx. We swear, Passalos said. Stealing from people is our speciality. I love harassment, Akmon agreed. Where are we going? Leo grinned. Ever heard of, New York? Chapter 13. Percy. Percy had taken his girlfriend on some romantic walks before. This wasn't one of them. They followed the river Phlegethon, stumbling over the glassy black terrain, jumping crevices and hiding behind rocks whenever the vampire girls slowed in front of them. It was tricky to stay far enough back to avoid getting spotted, but close enough to keep Kelly and her comrades in view through the dark, hazy air. The heat from the river baked Percy's skin. Every breath was like inhaling sulphur-scented fiberglass. When they needed a drink, the best they could do was sip some refreshing liquid fire. Yep, Percy definitely knew how to show a girl a good time. At least Annabeth's ankles seemed to have healed. She was hardly limping at all. Her various cuts and scrapes had faded. She'd tied her blonde hair back with a strip of denim torn from her jeans, and in the very light of the river, her grey eyes flickered. Despite being beat up, sooty, and dressed like a homeless person, she looked great to Percy. So what if they were in Tartarus? So what if they stood a slim chance of surviving? He was so glad that they were together, he had the ridiculous urge to smile. Physically, Percy felt better too. Though his clothes looked like he'd been through a hurricane of broken glass, he was thirsty, hungry, and scared out of his mind, though he wasn't going to tell Annabeth that. But he'd shaken off the hopeless cold of the river Cocytus, and, as nasty as the fire water tasted, it seemed to keep him going. Time was impossible to judge. They trudged along, following the river as it cut through the harsh landscape. Fortunately, the Olympus weren't exactly speed walkers. They shuffled on their mismatched bronze and donkey legs, hissing and fighting with each other, apparently in no hurry to reach the doors of death. Once, the demons sped up in excitement and swarmed something that looked like a beached carcass on the riverbank. Percy couldn't tell what it was. A fallen monster? An animal of some kind? The Olympus attacked it with relish. When the demons moved on, Percy and Annabeth reached the spot and found nothing left except a few splintered bones and glistening stains drying in the heat of the river. Percy had no doubt the Olympus would devour demigods with the same gusto. "Come on." He led Annabeth gently away from the scene. "We don't want to lose them." As they walked, Percy thought about the first time he'd fought the Olympus, Kelly, at Good High School's freshman orientation, when he and Rachel Elizabeth Dare had got trapped in the band hall. At the time, it had seemed like a hopeless situation. Now he'd give anything to have a problem that simple. At least he'd been in the mortal world then. Here, there was nowhere to run. Wow. When he started looking back on the war with Kronos as the good old days, that was sad. He kept hoping things would get better for Annabeth and him, but their lives just got more and more dangerous, as if the three fates were up there spinning their futures with barbed wire instead of thread, just to see how much two demigods could tolerate. After a few more miles, the Olympus disappeared over a ridge. When Percy and Annabeth caught up, they found themselves at the edge of another massive cliff. The river Phlegethon spilled over the side in jagged tiers of fiery waterfalls. The demon ladies were picking their way down the cliff, jumping from ledge to ledge like mountain goats. Percy's heart crept into his throat. Even if he and Annabeth reached the bottom of the cliff alive, they didn't have much to look forward to. The landscape below them was a bleak ash-grey plain bristling with black trees, like insect hair. The ground was pocked with blisters. Every once in a while the bubble would swell and burst, disgorging a monster like a larva from an egg. Suddenly, Percy wasn't hungry anymore. All the newly formed monsters were crawling and hobbling in the same direction, towards a bank of black fog that swallowed the horizon like a storm front. The Phlegethon flowed in the same direction until about halfway across the plain, where it met another river of black water. Maybe the Cocytus? The two floods combined in steaming, boiling cataract and flowed on as one towards the black fog. The longer Percy looked at that storm of darkness, the less he wanted to go there. It could be hiding anything, an ocean, a bottomless pit, an army of monsters. But if the doors of death were in that direction, it was their only chance to get home. He peered over the edge of the cliff. "Wish we could fly," he muttered. Annabeth rubbed her arms. "Remember Luke's winged shoes? I wonder if they're still down here somewhere." Percy remembered. Those shoes had been cursed to drag their wearer into Tartarus. They'd almost taken his best friend Grover. "I'd settle for a hang glider." "Maybe not a good idea," Annabeth pointed. Above them, dark winged shapes spiralled in and out of the blood-red clouds. "Furies?" Percy wondered. "Or some other kind of demon," Annabeth said. "Tartarus has thousands." "Including the kind that eats hang gliders," Percy guessed. "Okay, so we climb." He couldn't see the Olympus below them any more. They disappeared behind one of the ridges, but that didn't matter. It was clear where he and Annabeth needed to go. Like all the maggot monsters crawling over the plains of Tartarus, they should head towards the dark horizon. Percy was just brimming with enthusiasm for that. Chapter 14. Percy. As they started down the cliff, Percy concentrated on the challenges at hand, keeping his footing, avoiding rock slides that would alert the Olympus to their presence, and of course making sure he and Annabeth didn't plummet to their deaths. About halfway down the precipice, Annabeth said, "Stop, okay? Just a quick break." Her legs wobbled so badly, Percy cursed himself for not calling a rest earlier. They sat together on a ledge, next to a roaring, fiery waterfall. Percy put his arm around Annabeth, and she leaned against him, shaking from exhaustion. He wasn't much better. His stomach felt like it had shrunk to the size of a gumdrop. If they came across any more monster carcasses, he was afraid he might pull an Olympus and try to devour it. At least he had Annabeth. They would find a way out of Tartarus. They had to. He didn't think much of fates and prophecies, but he did believe in one thing. Annabeth and he were supposed to be together. They hadn't survived so much just to get killed now. "Things could be worse," Annabeth ventured. "Yeah?" Percy didn't see how, but he tried to sound upbeat. She snuggled against him. Her hair smelled of smoke, and if he closed his eyes he could almost imagine they were at the campfire at Camp Half-Blood. "We could have fallen into the River Leth," she said. "Lost all our memories." Percy's skin crawled just thinking about it. He'd had enough trouble with amnesia for one lifetime. Only last month Hera had erased his memories to put him among the Roman demigods. Percy had stumbled into Camp Jupiter with no idea who he was or where he came from. And a few years before that, he'd fought a titan on the banks of the Lech, near Hades' palace. He'd blasted the titan with water from that river and completely wiped his memory clean. Yeah, the Lech, he muttered. Not my favourite. What was the titan's name? Annabeth asked. Iapetus? He said it meant the impaler or something. No, the name you gave him after he lost his memory. Steve? Bob, Percy said. Annabeth managed a weak laugh. Bob the Titan. Percy's lips were so parched, it hurt to smile. He wondered what had happened to Iapetus after they'd left him in Hades' palace. If he was still content being Bob, friendly, happy and clueless. Percy hoped so, but the underworld seemed to bring out the worst in everyone, monsters, heroes and gods. He gazed across the ashen plains. The other titans were supposed to be here in Tartarus, maybe bound in chains or roaming aimlessly, or hiding in some of those dark crevices. Percy and his allies had destroyed the worst titan, Kronos, but even his remains might be down here somewhere. A billion angry titan particles floating through the blood-coloured clouds or lurking in that dark fog. Percy decided not to think about that. He kissed Annabeth's forehead. We should keep moving. You want some more fire to drink? I'll pass. They struggled to their feet. The rest of the cliff looked impossible to descend, nothing more than a cross-hatching of tiny ledges, but they kept climbing down. Percy's body went on autopilot. His fingers cramped. He felt blisters popping up on his ankles. He got shaky from hunger. He wondered if they would die of starvation, or if the firewater would keep them going. He remembered the punishment of Tantalus, who'd been permanently stuck in a pool of water under a fruit tree, but couldn't reach either food or drink. Geez, Percy hadn't thought about Tantalus in years. That stupid guy had been paroled briefly to serve as director at Camp Half-Blood. Probably he was back in the fields of punishment. Percy had never felt sorry for the jerk before, but now he was starting to sympathise. He could imagine what it would be like, getting hungrier and hungrier for eternity, but never being able to eat. Keep climbing, he told himself. Cheeseburgers, his stomach replied. Shut up, he thought. With fries, his stomach complained. A billion years later, with a dozen new blisters in his feet, Percy reached the bottom. He helped Annabeth down, and they collapsed on the ground. Ahead of them stretched miles of wasteland, bubbling with monstrous larvae and big, insect-haired trees. To their right, the Phlegethon split into branches that etched the plain, widening into a delta of smoke and fire. To the north, along the main route of the river, the ground was riddled with cave entrances. Here and there, spires of rock jutted up like exclamation points. Under Percy's hand, the soil felt alarmingly warm and smooth. He tried to grab a handful, then realised that under a thin layer of dirt and debris, the ground was a single vast membrane, like skin. He almost threw up, but forced himself not to. There was nothing in his stomach but fire. He didn't mention it to Annabeth, but he started to feel like something was watching them, something vast and malevolent. He couldn't zero in on it, because the presence was all around them. Watching was the wrong word too. That implied eyes, and this thing was simply aware of them. The ridges above them now looked less like steps and more like rows of massive teeth. The spires of rock looked like broken ribs, and if the ground was skin... Percy forced those thoughts aside. This place was just freaking him out, that was all. Annabeth stood, wiping soot from her face. She gazed towards the darkness on the horizon. We're going to be completely exposed, crossing the plain. About 100 yards ahead of them, a blister burst on the ground. A monster clawed its way out. A glistening telkine with slick fur, a seal-like body and stunted human limbs. It managed to crawl a few yards before something shot out of the nearest cave, so fast that Percy could only register a dark green reptilian head. The monster snatched the squealing telkine in its jaws and dragged it into the darkness. Reborn in Tartarus for 2 seconds, only to be eaten, Percy wondered if that telkine would pop up in some other place in Tartarus, and how long it would take to reform. He swallowed down the sour taste of firewater. Oh yeah, this'll be fun. Annabeth helped him to his feet. He took one last look at the cliffs, but there was no going back. He would have given 1,000 golden drachmas to have Frank Zang with them right now. Good old Frank, who always seemed to show up when needed and could turn into an eagle or dragon to fly them across the stupid wasteland. They started walking, trying to avoid the cave entrances, sticking close to the bank of the river. They were just skirting one of the spires when a glint of movement caught Percy's eye. Something darting between the rocks to their right. A monster following them? Or maybe it was just some random baddie heading for the doors of death. Suddenly he remembered why they'd started following this route, and he froze in his tracks. The Olympus. He grabbed Annabeth's arm. Where are they? Annabeth scanned a 360, her grey eyes bright with alarm. Maybe the demon ladies had been snapped up by that reptile in the cave. If the Olympus was still ahead of them, they should have been visible somewhere on the plains. Unless they were hiding. Too late. Percy drew his sword. The Olympus emerged from the rocks all around them, 5 of them forming a ring, a perfect trap. Kelly limped forward on her mismatched legs. Her fiery hair burned across her shoulders like a miniature Phlegethon waterfall. Her tattered cheerleader outfit was splattered with rusty brown stains, and Percy was pretty sure they weren't ketchup. She fixed him with her glowing red eyes and bared her fangs. "Percy Jackson," she cooed. "How awesome! I don't even have to return to the mortal world to destroy you." Chapter 15. Percy. Percy recalled how dangerous Kelly had been the last time they'd fought in the labyrinth. Despite those mismatched legs, she could move fast when she wanted to. She dodged his sword strikes and would have eaten his face if Annabeth hadn't stabbed her from behind. Now she had 4 friends with her. "And your friend Annabeth is with you," Kelly hissed with laughter. "Oh yeah, I totally remember her." Kelly touched her own sternum, where the tip of the knife had exited when Annabeth had stabbed her in the back. "What's the matter, daughter of Athena? Don't have your weapon? Bummer! I'd use it to kill you." Percy tried to think. He and Annabeth stood shoulder to shoulder as they had many times before, ready to fight, but neither of them was in good shape for battle. Annabeth was empty-handed. They were hopelessly outnumbered. There was nowhere to run, no help coming. Briefly, Percy considered calling for Mrs. O'Leary, his hellhound friend, who could shadow travel. Even if she heard him, could she make it to Tartarus? This was where monsters went when they died. Calling her here might kill her, or turn her back to her natural state as a fierce monster. No, he couldn't do that to his dog. So, no help. Fighting was a long shot. That left Annabeth's favourite tactics. Trickery, talk, delay. "So," he started, "I guess you're wondering what we're doing in Tartarus." Kelly snickered. "Not really. I just want to kill you." That would have been it, but Annabeth chimed in. "Too bad," she said, "because you have no idea what's going on in the mortal world." The other Olympus circled, watching Kelly for a cue to attack, but the ex-cheerleader only snarled, crouching out of reach of Percy's sword. "We know enough," Kelly said. "Gaia has spoken. You're heading towards a major defeat." Annabeth sounded so confident, even Percy was impressed. She glanced at the other Olympus one by one, then pointed accusingly at Kelly. "This one claims she's leading you to a victory. She's lying. The last time she was in the mortal world, Kelly was in charge of keeping my friend Luke Castellan faithful to Kronos. In the end, Luke rejected him. He gave his life to expel Kronos. The Titans lost because Kelly failed. Now Kelly wants to lead you to another disaster." The other Olympus muttered and shifted uneasily. "Enough!" Kelly's fingernails grew into long black talons. She glared at Annabeth as if imagining her sliced into small pieces. Percy was pretty sure Kelly had had a thing for Luke Castellan. Luke had had that effect on girls, even donkey-legged vampires, and Percy wasn't sure bringing up his name was such a good idea. "The girl lies," Kelly said. "So the Titans lost. Fine. That was part of the plan to wake Gaia. Now the Earth Mother and her giants will destroy the mortal world, and we will totally feast on demigods." The other vampires gnashed their teeth in a frenzy of excitement. Percy had been in the middle of a school of sharks when the water was full of blood. That wasn't nearly as scary as Olympus ready to feed. He prepared to attack, but how many could he dispatch before they overwhelmed him? It wouldn't be enough. "The demigods have united," Annabeth yelled. "You'd better think twice before you attack us. Romans and Greeks will fight you together. You don't stand a chance." The Olympus backed up nervously, hissing, "Romani!" Percy guessed they'd had experience with the 12th Legion before, and it hadn't worked out well for them. "Yeah, you bet, Romani." Percy bared his forearm and showed them the brand he'd got at Camp Jupiter, the SPQR mark with a trident of Neptune. "You mix Greek and Roman, and you know what you get? You get BAM!" He stomped his foot, and the Olympus scrambled back. One fell off the boulder where he'd been perched. That made Percy feel good, but they recovered quickly and closed in again. "Bold talk," Kelly said. "For 2 demigods lost in Tartarus. Lower your sword, Percy Jackson, and I'll kill you quickly. Believe me, there are worse ways to die down here." "Wait," Annabeth tried again. "Aren't Olympus the servants of Hecate?" Kelly curled her lip. So Hecate is on our side now," Annabeth said. "She has a cabin at Camp Half-Blood. Some of her demigod children are my friends. If you fight us, she'll be angry." Percy wanted to hug Annabeth. She was so brilliant. One of the other Olympus growled. "Is this true, Kelly? Has our mistress made peace with Olympus?" "Shut up, Seraphine," Kelly screeched. "Gods, You're annoying. I will not cross the Dark Lady. Annabeth took the opening. You'd all better start following Seraphine. She's older and wiser. Yes, Seraphine shrieked. Follow me. Kelly struck so fast, Percy didn't have the chance to raise his sword. Fortunately, she didn't attack him. Kelly lashed out at Seraphine. For half a second, the two demons were a blur of slashing claws and fangs. Then it was over. Kelly stood triumphant over a pile of dust. From her claws hung the tattered remains of Seraphine's dress. Any more issues? Kelly snapped at her sisters. Hecate is the goddess of the mist. Her ways are mysterious. Who knows which side she truly favours? She is also the goddess of the crossroads, and she expects us to make our own choices. I choose the path that will bring us the most demigod blood. I choose Gaia. Her friends hissed in approval. Annabeth glanced at Percy, and he saw that she was out of ideas. She'd done what she could. She'd got Kelly to eliminate one of her own. Now there was nothing left but to fight. For 2 years, I churned in the void, Kelly said. Do you know how completely annoying it is to be vaporized, Annabeth Chase? Slowly reforming, fully conscious, in searing pain for months and years as your body regrows, then finally breaking the crust of this hellish place and clawing your way back to daylight, all because some little girl stabbed you in the back. Her baleful eyes held Annabeth's. I wonder what happens if a demigod is killed in Tartarus. I doubt it's ever happened before. Let's find out. Percy sprang, slashing Riptide in a huge arc. He cut one of the demons in half, but Kelly dodged and charged Annabeth. The other two Olympus launched themselves at Percy. One grabbed his sword arm. Her friend jumped on his back. Percy tried to ignore them and staggered towards Annabeth, determined to go down defending her if he had to. But Annabeth was doing pretty well. She tumbled to one side, evading Kelly's claws, and came up with a rock in her hand, which she smacked into Kelly's nose. Kelly wailed. Annabeth scooped up gravel and flung it in the Olympus's eyes. Meanwhile, Percy thrashed from side to side, trying to throw off his Olympus hitchhiker, but her claws sank deeper into his shoulders. The second Olympus held his arm, preventing him from using Riptide. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Kelly lunge, raking her talons across Annabeth's arm. Annabeth screamed and fell. Percy stumbled in her direction. The vampire on his back sank her teeth into his neck. Searing pain coursed through his body. His knees buckled. Stay on your feet, he told himself. You have to beat them. Then the other vampire bit his sword arm, and Riptide clattered to the ground. That was it. His luck had finally run out. Kelly loomed over Annabeth, savouring her moment of triumph. The other two Olympus circled Percy, their mouths slavering, ready for another taste. Then a shadow fell across Percy. A deep war cry bellowed from somewhere above, echoing across the plains of Tartarus, and a Titan dropped onto the battlefield. Chapter 16. Percy. Percy thought he was hallucinating. It just wasn't possible that a huge silvery figure could drop out of the sky and stomp Kelly flat, trampling her into a mound of monster dust. But that's exactly what happened. The Titan was 10 feet tall, with wild silver Einstein hair, pure silver eyes and muscular arms protruding from a ripped-up blue janitor's uniform. In his hand was a massive push broom. His name tag incredibly read Bob. Annabeth yelped and tried to crawl away, but the giant janitor wasn't interested in her. He turned to the two remaining Olympus, who stood over Percy. One was foolish enough to attack. She lunged with the speed of a tiger, but she never stood a chance. A spearhead jutted from the end of Bob's broom. With a single deadly swipe, he cut her to dust. The last vampire tried to run. Bob threw his broom like a massive boomerang. Was there such a thing as a broomerang? It sliced through the vampire and returned to Bob's hand. Sweep! The Titan grinned with delight and did a victory dance. Sweep, sweep, sweep! Percy couldn't speak. He couldn't bring himself to believe that something good had actually happened. Annabeth looked just as shocked. How? She stammered. Percy called me, the janitor said happily. Yes, he did. Annabeth crawled a little further away. Her arm was bleeding badly. Called you? Wait, you're Bob. The Bob. The janitor frowned when he noticed Annabeth's wounds. Owie! Annabeth flinched as he knelt next to her. It's okay, Percy said, still woozy with pain. He's friendly. He remembered when he'd first met Bob. The Titan had healed a bad wound on Percy's shoulder just by touching it. Sure enough, the janitor tapped Annabeth's forearm, and it mended instantly. Bob chuckled, pleased with himself, then bounded over to Percy and healed his bleeding neck and arm. The Titan's hands were surprisingly warm and gentle. All better, Bob declared, his eerie silver eyes crinkling with pleasure. I am Bob, Percy's friend. Yeah, Percy managed. Thanks for the help, Bob. It's really good to see you again. Yes, the janitor agreed. Bob, that's me, Bob, Bob, Bob. He shuffled around, obviously pleased with his name. I am helping. I heard my name. Upstairs in Hades' palace. Nobody calls for Bob unless there is a mess. Bob, sweep up those bones. Bob, mop up those tortured souls. Bob, a zombie exploded in the dining room. Annabeth gave Percy a puzzled look, but he had no explanation. Then I heard my friend call. The Titan beamed. Percy said, Bob. He grabbed Percy's arm and hoisted him to his feet. That's awesome, Percy said. Seriously, but how did you? Oh, time to talk later. Bob's expression turned serious. We must go before they find you. They are coming. Yes, indeed. They? Annabeth asked. Percy scanned the horizon. He saw no approaching monsters, nothing but the stark grey wasteland. Yes, Bob agreed, but Bob knows a way. Come on, friends. We will have fun. Chapter 17. Frank. Frank woke up as a python, which puzzled him. Changing into an animal wasn't confusing. He did that all the time, but he had never changed from one animal to another in his sleep before. He was pretty sure he hadn't dozed off as a snake. Usually, he slept like a dog. He discovered that he got through the night much better if he curled up on his bunk in the shape of a bulldog. For whatever reason, his nightmares didn't bother him as much. The constant screaming in his head almost disappeared. He had no idea why he'd become a reticulated python, but it did explain his dream about slowly swallowing a cow. His jaw was still sore. He braced himself and changed back to human form. Immediately, his splitting headache returned, along with the voices. Fight them, yelled Mars. Take this ship. Defend Rome. The voice of Ares shouted back. Kill the Romans. Blood and death. Large guns. His father's Roman and Greek personalities screamed back and forth in Frank's mind, with the usual soundtrack of battle noises, explosions, assault rifles, roaring jet engines, all throbbing like a subwoofer behind Frank's eyes. He sat up on his berth, dizzy with pain. As he did every morning, he took a deep breath and stared at the lamp on his desk. A tiny flame that burned night and day, fueled by magic olive oil from the supply room. Fire. Frank's biggest fear. Keeping an open flame in his room terrified him, but it also helped him focus. The noise in his head faded into the background, allowing him to think. He'd got better at this, but for days he'd been almost worthless. As soon as the fighting broke out at Camp Jupiter, the war god's two voices had started screaming non-stop. Ever since, Frank had been stumbling around in a daze, barely able to function. He'd acted like a fool, and he was sure his friends thought he'd lost his marbles. He couldn't tell them what was wrong. There was nothing they could do, and from listening to them talk, Frank was pretty sure they didn't have the same problem with their godly parents yelling in their ears. Just Frank's luck. But he had to pull it together. His friends needed him, especially now with Annabeth gone. Annabeth had been kind to him. Even when he was so distracted, he'd acted like a buffoon. Annabeth had been patient and helpful. While Ares screamed that Athena's children couldn't be trusted and Mars bellowed at him to kill all the Greeks, Frank had grown to respect Annabeth. Now that they were without her, Frank was the next best thing the group had to a military strategist. They would need him for the trip ahead. He rose and got dressed. Fortunately, he managed to buy some new clothes in Siena a couple of days ago, replacing the laundry that Leo had sent flying away on Buford the Table. Long story. He tugged on some Levi's and an army green t-shirt, and then reached for his favourite pullover before remembering he didn't need it. The weather was too warm. More important, he didn't need the pockets anymore to protect the magical piece of firewood that controlled his lifespan. Hazel was keeping it safe for him. Maybe that should have made him nervous. If the firewood burned, Frank died. End of story. But he trusted Hazel more than he trusted himself. Knowing she was safeguarding the big weakness made him feel better, like he'd fastened his seatbelt for a high-speed chase. He slung his bow and quiver over his shoulder. Immediately they morphed into a regular backpack. Frank loved that. He never would have known about the quiver's camouflage power if Leo hadn't figured it out for him. Leo, Mars raged. He must die. Throttle him, Ares cried. Throttle everyone. Who are we talking about again? The two began shouting at each other again over the sound of bombs exploding in Frank's skull. He steadied himself against the wall. For days Frank had listened to these voices demanding Leo Valdez's death. After all, Leo had started the war with Camp Jupiter by firing a ballista into the Forum. Sure, he'd been possessed at the time, but still Mars demanded vengeance. Leo made things harder by constantly teasing Frank, and Ares demanded that Frank retaliate for every insult. Frank kept the voices at bay, but it wasn't easy. On their trip across the Atlantic, Leo had said something that still stuck in Frank's mind. When they'd learned that Gaia, the evil earth goddess, had put a bounty on their heads, Leo had wanted to know for how much. "I can understand not being as pricey as Jason or Percy," he'd said, "but am I worth like 2 or 3 francs? Just another one of Leo's stupid jokes, but the comment hit a little too close to home. On the Argo 2, Frank definitely felt like the LVP, least valuable player. Sure, he could turn into animals. So what? His biggest claim to helplessness or helpfulness so far had been changing into a weasel to escape from an underground workshop, and even that had been Leo's idea. Frank was better known for the giant goldfish fiasco in Atlanta, and just yesterday for turning into a 200-kilo gorilla only to get knocked senseless by a flashbang grenade. Leo hadn't made any gorilla jokes at his expense yet, but it was only a matter of time. "Kill him! Torture him, then kill him!" The two sides of the war gods seemed to be kicking and punching each other inside Frank's head, using his sinuses as a wrestling mat. "Blood! Guns! Rome! War!" "Quiet down!" Frank ordered. Amazingly, the voices obeyed. "Okay then," Frank thought. Maybe he could finally get those annoying screaming mini-gods under control. Maybe today would be a good day. That hope was shattered as soon as he climbed above deck. "What are they?" Hazel asked. The Argo 2 was docked at a busy wharf. On one side stretched a shipping canal, about 1/2 kilometre wide. On the other, spread of the city of Venice, red tiled roofs, metal church domes, steepled towers and sun-bleached buildings in all the colours of Valentine candy hearts, red, white, ochre, pink and orange. Everywhere there were statues of lions, on top of pedestals, over doorways, on the porticos of the largest buildings. There were so many, Frank figured the lion must be the city's mascot. Where streets should have been, green canals etched their way through the neighbourhoods, each one jammed with motorboats. Along the docks, the sidewalks were mobbed with tourists, shopping at the T-shirt kiosks, overflowing from stores and lounging across acres of outdoor cafe tables, like pods of sea lions. Frank had thought Rome was full of tourists. This place was insane. Hazel and the rest of his friends weren't paying attention to any of that, though. They had gathered at the starboard rail to stare at the dozens of weird, shaggy monsters milling through the crowds. Each monster was about the size of a cow, with a bowed back like a broken-down horse, matted grey fur, skinny legs and black cloven hooves. The creatures' heads seemed much too heavy for their necks. Their long anteater-like snouts drooped to the ground. Their overgrown grey manes completely covered their eyes. Frank watched as one of the creatures lumbered across the promenade, snuffling and licking the pavement with its long tongue. The tourists parted around it, unconcerned. A few of them petted it. Frank wondered how the mortals could be so calm. Then the monster's appearance flickered. For a moment it turned into an old, fat beagle. Jason grunted. "The mortals think they're stray dogs?" "Or pets roaming around," Piper said. "My dad shot a film in Venice once. I remember him telling me there were dogs everywhere. Venetians love dogs." Frank frowned. He kept forgetting that Piper's dad was Tristan McLean, A-list movie star. She didn't talk about him much. She seemed pretty much down to earth for a kid raised in Hollywood. That was fine with Frank. The last thing they needed on this quest was paparazzi taking pictures of all Frank's epic fails. "But what are they?" he asked, repeating Hazel's question. "They look like starving, shaggy cows with sheepdog hair." He waited for someone to enlighten him. Nobody volunteered any information. "Maybe they're harmless," Leo suggested. "They're ignoring the mortals." "Harmless?" Gleason Hedge laughed. The satyr wore his usual gym shorts, sports shirt and coach's whistle. His expression was as gruff as ever, but he still had one pink rubber band stuck in his hair from the prankster dwarfs in Bologna. Frank was kind of scared to mention it to him. "Valdez, how many harmless monsters have we met? We should just aim the ballistay and see what happens." No," Leo said. For once, Frank agreed with Leo. There were too many monsters. It would be impossible to target one without causing collateral damage to the crowds of tourists. Besides, if those creatures panicked and stampeded... "We'll have to walk through them. Hope they're peaceful," Frank said, hating the idea already. "It's the only way we're going to track down the owner of that book." Leo pulled the leather-bound manual from underneath his arm. He'd slapped a sticky note on the cover with the address the dwarfs in Bologna had given him. "La Casa Nera," he said. "Cala Frezzeria." "The Black House," Nico D'Angelo translated. "Cala Frezzeria is the street." Frank tried not to flinch when he realised Nico was at his shoulder. The guy was so quiet and brooding, he almost seemed to dematerialise when he wasn't speaking. Hazel might have been the one who came back from the dead, but Nico was way more ghost-like. "You speak Italian?" Frank asked. Nico shot him a warning look like, "Watch the questions." He spoke calmly, though. "Frank is right. We have to find that address. The only way to do it is to walk the city. Venice is a maze. We'll have to risk the crowds and those Whatever they are. Thunder rumbled in the clear summer sky. They'd passed through some storms the night before. Frank had thought that they were over, but now he wasn't sure. The air felt as thick and warm as sauna steam. Jason frowned at the horizon. Maybe I should stay on board. Lots of venti in that storm last night, if they decide to attack the ship again. He didn't need to finish. They'd all had experiences with angry wind spirits. Jason was the only one who had much luck fighting them. Coach Hedge grunted. Well, I'm out too. If you soft-hearted cupcakes are going to stroll through Venice without even whacking those furry animals on the head, forget it. I don't like boring expeditions. It's okay, Coach, Leo grinned. We still have to repair the foremast. Then I need you to help in the engine room. I've got an idea for a new installation. Frank didn't like the gleam in Leo's eye. Since Leo had found that Archimedes sphere, he'd been trying out a lot of new installations. Usually they exploded or sent smoke billowing upstairs into Frank's cabin. Well, Piper shifted her feet. Whoever goes should be good with animals. I'll admit I'm not great with cows. Frank figured there was a story behind that comment, but he decided not to ask. I'll go, he said. He wasn't sure why he volunteered. Maybe because he was anxious to be useful for a change, or maybe he didn't want anyone beating him to the punch. Animals? Frank can turn into animals. Send him. Leo patted him on the shoulder and handed him the leather-bound book. Awesome. If you pass a hardware store, could you get me some 2x4s and a gallon of tar? Leo, Hazel chided, it's not a shopping trip. I'll go with Frank, Nico offered. Frank's eyes started twitching. The war god's voices rose to a crescendo in his head. Kill him! Gracious scum! No, I love gracious scum. You're good with animals? He asked. Nico smiled without humour. Actually, most animals hate me. They can sense death. But there's something about this city. His expression turned grim. Lots of death. Restless spirits. If I go, I may be able to keep them at bay. Besides, as you noticed, I speak Italian. Leo scratched his head. Lots of death, huh? Personally, I'm trying to avoid lots of death, but you guys have fun. Frank wasn't sure what scared him more. Shaggy cow monsters, hordes of restless ghosts, or going somewhere alone with Nico D'Angelo. I'll go too. Hazel slipped her arm through Frank's. 3 is the best number for a demigod quest, right? Frank tried not to look too relieved. He didn't want to offend Nico, but he glanced at Hazel and told her with his eyes, Thank you, thank you, thank you. Nico stared at the canals, as if wondering what new and interesting forms of evil spirits might be lurking there. All right then, let's go find the owner of that book. Chapter 18. Frank. Frank might have liked Venice if it hadn't been summertime and tourist season, and if the city wasn't overrun with large hairy creatures. Between the rows of old houses and the canals, the stone pavements were already too narrow for the crowds, jostling one another and stopping to take pictures. The monsters made things worse. They shuffled around with their heads down, bumping into mortals and sniffing the ground. One seemed to find something it liked on the edge of a canal. It nibbled and licked at a crack between the stones until it dislodged some sort of greenish root. The monster sucked it up happily and shambled along. Well, they're plant eaters, Frank said. That's good news. Hazel slipped her hand into his. Unless they supplement their diet with demigods. Let's hope not. Frank was so pleased to be holding her hand that the crowds and the heat and the monsters suddenly didn't seem so bad. He felt needed, useful. Not that Hazel required his protection. Anybody who'd seen her charging on Arion with her sword drawn would know she could take care of herself. Still, Frank liked being next to her, imagining he was her bodyguard. If any of these monsters tried to hurt her, Frank would gladly turn into a rhinoceros and push them into the canal. Could he be a rhino? Frank had never tried that before. Nico stopped. There. They turned into a smaller street, leaving the canal behind. Ahead of them was a small plaza lined with 5-story buildings. The area was strangely deserted, as if the mortals could sense it wasn't safe. In the middle of the cobblestone courtyard, a dozen shaggy cow creatures were sniffing around the mossy base of an old stone wall. A stone well. A lot of cows in one place, Frank said. Yeah, but look, Nico said. Past that archway. Nico's eyes must have been better than his. Frank squinted. At the far end of the plaza, a stone archway carved with lions led into a narrow street. Just past the arch, one of the town houses was painted black. The only black building Frank had seen so far in Venice. La Casa Nera, he guessed. Hazel's grip tightened on his fingers. I don't like that plaza. It feels cold. Frank wasn't sure what she meant. He was still sweating like crazy. But Nico nodded. He studied the townhouse windows, most of which were covered with wooden shutters. You're right, Hazel. This neighbourhood's, well, it's filled with lemurs. Lemurs? Frank asked nervously. I'm guessing you don't mean the furry little guys from Madagascar? Angry ghosts, Nico said. Lemurs go back to Roman times. They hang around a lot of Italian cities, but I've never felt so many in one place. My mum told me. He hesitated. She used to tell me stories about the ghosts of Venice. Again, Frank wondered about Nico's past, but he was afraid to ask. He caught Hazel's eye. Go ahead, she seemed to be saying. Nico needs practice talking to people. The sounds of assault rifles and atom bombs got louder in Frank's head. Mars and Ares were trying to out-sing each other with Dixie and the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Frank did his best to push that aside. Nico, your mum was Italian? He guessed. She was from Venice? Nico nodded reluctantly. She met Hades here, back in the 1930s. As World War II got closer, she fled to the US with my sister and me. I mean, Bianca, my other sister. I don't remember much about Italy, but I can still speak the language. Frank tried to think of a response. Oh, that's nice, didn't seem to cut it. He was hanging out with not one but two demigods who'd been pulled out of time. They were both technically about 70 years older than he was. Must have been hard on your mum, Frank said. I guess we'll do anything for someone we love. Hazel squeezed his hand appreciatively. Nico stared at the cobblestones. Yeah, he said bitterly. I guess we will. Frank wasn't sure what Nico was thinking. He had a hard time imagining Nico D'Angelo acting out of love for anybody, except maybe Hazel, but Frank decided he'd gone as far as he dared with the personal questions. So, the Lemures, he swallowed. How do we, avoid them? I'm already on it, Nico said. I'm sending out the message that they should stay away and ignore us. Hopefully that's enough. Otherwise, things could get messy. Hazel pursed her lips. Let's get going, she suggested. Halfway across the piazza, everything went wrong, but it had nothing to do with the ghosts. They were skirting the well in the middle of the square, trying to give the cow monster some distance, when Hazel stumbled on a loose piece of cobblestone. Frank caught her. 6 or 7 of the big grey beasts turned to look at them. Frank glimpsed a glowing green eye under one's mane, and instantly he was hit with a wave of nausea, the way he felt when he ate too much cheese or ice cream. The creatures made deep throbbing sounds in their throats, like angry foghorns. Nice cows, Frank murmured. He put himself between his friends and the monsters. Guys, I'm thinking we should back out of here slowly. I'm such a klutz, Hazel whispered. Sorry, it's not your fault, Nico said. Look at your feet. Frank glanced down and caught his breath. Under their shoes, the paving stones were moving. Spiky plant tendrils were pushing up from the cracks. Nico stepped back. The roots snaked out in his direction, trying to follow. The tendrils got thicker, exuding a steamy green vapour that smelled of boiled cabbage. These roots seemed to like demigods, Frank noted. Hazel's hand drifted to her sword hilt, and the cow creatures liked the roots. The entire herd was now looking their direction, making foghorn growls and stamping their hooves. Frank understood animal behaviour well enough to get the message. You are standing on our food. That makes you enemies. Frank tried to think. There were too many monsters to fight. Something about their eyes hidden under those shaggy manes. Frank had got sick from the barest glimpse. He had a bad feeling that if these monsters made direct eye contact, he might get a lot worse than nauseous. Don't meet their eyes, Frank warned. I'll distract them. You two back up slowly towards the black house. The creatures tensed, ready to attack. Never mind, Frank said. Run! As it turned out, Frank could not turn into a rhino, and he lost valuable time trying. Nico and Hazel bolted for the side street. Frank stepped in front of the monsters, hoping to keep their attention. He yelled at the top of his lungs, imagining himself as a fearsome rhinoceros, but with Ares and Mars screaming in his head, he couldn't concentrate. He remained regular old Frank. 2 of the cow monsters peeled off from the herd to chase Nico and Hazel. No, Frank yelled after them. Me, I'm the rhino. The rest of the herd surrounded Frank. They growled, emerald green gas billowing from their nostrils. Frank stepped back to avoid the stuff, but the stench nearly knocked him over. Okay, so not a rhino, something else. Frank knew he had only seconds before the monsters trampled or poisoned him, but he couldn't think. He couldn't hold the image of any animal long enough to change form. Then he glanced up at one of the townhouse balconies and saw a stone carving, the symbol of Venice. The next instant, Frank was a full-grown lion. He roared in challenge, then sprang from the middle of the monster herd and landed 8 meters away, on top of the old stone well. The monsters growled in reply. 3 of them sprang at once, but Frank was ready. His lion reflexes were built for speed in combat. He slashed the first 2 monsters into dust with his claws, then sank his fangs into the third one's throat and tossed it aside. There were 7 left, plus the 2 chasing his friends. Not great odds, but Frank had to keep the bulk of herd focused on him. He roared at the monsters and they edged away. They outnumbered him, yes, but Frank was atop of the chain predator. The herd monsters knew it. They had also just watched him send 3 of their friends to Tartarus. He pressed his advantage and leapt off the well, still bearing his fangs. The herd backed off. If he could just manoeuvre around them, then turn and run after his friends. He was doing all right, until he took his first backward step towards the arch. One of the cows, either the bravest or the stupidest, took that as a sign of weakness. It charged and blasted Frank in the face with green gas. He slashed the monster to dust, but the damage was already done. He forced himself not to breathe. Regardless, he could feel the fur burning off his snout. His eyes stung. He staggered back, half blind and dizzy, dimly aware of Nico screaming his name. "Frank! Frank!" He turned to focus. He was back in human form, retching and stumbling. His face felt like it was peeling off. In front of him, the green cloud of gas floated between him and the herd. The remaining cow monsters eyed him warily, probably wondering if Frank had any more tricks up his sleeve. He glanced behind him. Under the stone arch, Nico D'Angelo was holding his black Stygian iron sword, gesturing at Frank to hurry. At Nico's feet, 2 puddles of darkness stained the ground, no doubt the remains of the cow monsters that had chased them. And Hazel, she was propped against the wall behind her brother. She wasn't moving. Frank ran towards them, forgetting about the monster herd. He rushed past Nico and grabbed Hazel's shoulders. Her head slumped against her chest. "She got a blast of green gas right in the face," Nico said miserably. I wasn't fast enough." Frank couldn't tell if she was breathing. Rage and despair battled inside him. He'd always been scared of Nico. Now, he wanted to drop-kick the son of Hades into the nearest canal. Maybe that wasn't fair, but Frank didn't care. Neither did the war god screaming in his head. "We need to get her back to the ship," Frank said. The cow monster herd prowled cautiously just beyond the archway. They bellowed their foghorn cries. From nearby streets, more monsters answered. Reinforcements would soon have the demigods surrounded. "We'll never make it on foot," Nico said. "Frank, turn into a giant eagle. Don't worry about me. Get her back to the Argo too." With his face burning and the voices screaming in his mind, Frank wasn't sure he could change shape. But he was about to try when a voice behind them said, "Your friends can't help you. They don't know the cure." Frank spun around. Standing on the threshold of the black house was a young man in jeans and a denim shirt. He had curly black hair and a friendly smile, though Frank doubted he was friendly. Probably he wasn't even human. At the moment, Frank didn't care. "Can you cure her?" he asked. "Of course," the man said, "but you'd better hurry inside. I think you've angered every catobleps in Venice." Chapter 19. Frank. They barely made it inside. As soon as their host threw the bolts, the cow monsters bellowed and slammed into the door, making it shudder on its hinges. "Oh, they can't get in," the man in denim promised. "You're safe now." "Safe?" Frank demanded. "Hazel is dying." Their host frowned as if he didn't appreciate Frank ruining his good mood. Yes, bring her this way." Frank carried Hazel as they followed the man further into the building. Nico offered to help, but Frank didn't need it. Hazel weighed nothing, and Frank's body hummed with adrenaline. He could feel Hazel shivering, so at least he knew she was alive, but her skin was cold. Her lips had taken on a greenish tinge, or was that just Frank's blurry vision? His eyes still burned from the monster's breath. His lungs felt like he'd inhaled a flaming cabbage. He didn't know why the gas had affected him less than it had Hazel. Maybe she'd got more of it in her lungs. He would have given anything to change places if it meant saving her. The voices of Mars and Ares yelled in his head, urging him to kill Nico and the man in denim and anyone else he could find, but Frank forced down the noise. The house's front room was some sort of greenhouse. The walls were lined with tables of plant trays under fluorescent lights. The air smelled of fertilizer solution. Maybe Venetians did their gardening inside, since they were surrounded by water instead of soil. Frank wasn't sure, but he didn't spend much time worrying about it. The back room looked like a combination garage, college, dorm and computer lab. Against the left wall glowed a bank of servers and laptops, their screensavers flashing pictures of ploughed fields and tractors. Against the right wall was a single bed, a messy desk with an open wardrobe filled with extra denim clothes and a stack of farm implements, like pitchforks and rakes. The back wall was a huge garage door. Parked next to it was a red and gold chariot with an open carriage and a single axle, like the chariots Frank had raced at Camp Jupiter. Sprouting from the sides of the driver's box were giant feathery wings. Wrapped around the rim of the left wheel, a spotted python snored loudly. Frank hadn't known that pythons could snore. He hoped he hadn't done that himself in python form last night. "Set your friend here," said the man in denim. Frank placed Hazel gently on the bed. He removed her sword and tried to make her comfortable, but she was as limp as a scarecrow. Her complexion definitely had a greenish tint. "What were those cow things?" Frank demanded. "What did they do to her?" "Catobleponus," said their host. Singular, catobleps. In English, it means down-looker. Called that because they're always looking down. Nico smacked his forehead. "Right, I remembered reading about them." Frank glared at him. "Now you remember?" Nico hung his head almost as low as a catobleps. I used to play this stupid card game when I was younger. Mythomagic. The catobleps was one of the monster cards." Frank blinked. "I played Mythomagic. I never saw that card. It was in the Africanus Extreme Expansion deck." "Oh." Their host cleared his throat. "Are you two done? Geeking out, as they say?" "Right, sorry," Nico muttered. "Anyway, Catobleponus have poison breath and a poison gaze. I thought they only lived in Africa." The man in denim shrugged. "That's their native land. They were accidentally imported to Venice hundreds of years ago. You've heard of St. Mark?" Frank wanted to scream with frustration. He didn't see how any of this was relevant, but if their host could heal Hazel, Frank decided maybe it would be best not to make him angry. Saints? They're not part of Greek mythology. The man in denim chuckled. "No, but St. Mark is the patron saint of the city. He died in Egypt. Oh, a long time ago, when the Venetians became powerful. Well, the relics of saints were a big tourist attraction back in the Middle Ages. The Venetians decided to steal St. Mark's remains and bring them to their big church of San Marco. They smuggled out his body in a barrel of pickled pig parts." "That's, disgusting," Frank said. "Yes," the man agreed with a smile. "The point is you can't do something like that and not have consequences. The Venetians unintentionally smuggled something else out of Egypt, the Catobleponus. They came here aboard that ship and have been breeding like rats ever since. They love the magical poison roots that grow here, swampy, foul-smelling plants that creep up from the canals. Makes their breath even more poisonous. Usually the monsters ignore mortals, but demigods, especially demigods who get in their way." "Got it," Frank snapped. "Can you cure her?" The man shrugged. "Possibly." Possibly. Frank had to use all his willpower not to throttle the guy. He put his hand under Hazel's nose. He couldn't feel her breath. "Nico, please tell me she's doing that death trance thing, like you did in a bronze jar." Nico grimaced. "I don't know if Hazel can do that. Her dad is technically Pluto, not Hades, so—" "Hades!" cried their host. He backed away, staring at Nico with distaste. "So that's what I smell. Children of the underworld. If I'd known that, I would never have let you in." Frank rose. "Hazel's a good person. You promised you would help her." "I did not promise." Nico drew his sword. "She's my sister," he growled. "I don't know who you are, but if you can cure her, you have to. Or so help me by the river Styx." "Oh, blah, blah, blah." The man waved his hand. Suddenly where Nico D'Angelo had been standing was a potted plant, about 5 feet tall, with drooping green leaves, tufts of silk and half a dozen ripe yellow ears of corn. "There," the man huffed, wagging his finger at the corn plant. "Children of Hades can't order me around. You should talk less and listen more. Now at least you have ears." Frank stumbled against the bed. "What did you... Why?" The man raised an eyebrow. Frank made a squeaky noise that wasn't very courageous. He'd been so focused on Hazel, he'd forgotten what Leo had told them about the guy they were looking for. "You're a god," he remembered. "Triptolemus," the man bowed. "My friends call me Trip, so don't call me that. And if you're another child of Hades—" "Mars," Frank said quickly. "Child of Mars." Triptolemus sniffed. "Well, not much better, but perhaps you deserve to be something better than a corn plant. Sorghum? Sorghum is very nice." "Wait," Frank pleaded. "We're here on a friendly mission. We brought a gift." Very slowly he reached into his backpack and brought out the leather-bound book. "This belongs to you?" "My almanac." Triptolemus grinned and seized the book. He thumbed through the pages and started bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Oh, this is fabulous. Where did you find it?" Bologna. There were these..." Frank remembered that he wasn't supposed to mention the dwarfs. "Terrible monsters. We risked our lives, but we knew this was important to you. So could you maybe, turn Nico back to normal and heal Hazel?" Trip looked up from his book. He'd been happily reciting lines to himself, something about turnip planting schedules. Frank wished that Ella, the harpy, was here. She would get along great with this guy. "Oh, heal them." Triptolemus chuckled disapprovingly. "I'm grateful for the book, of course. I can definitely let you go free, son of Mars, but I have a long-standing problem with Hades. After all, I owe my godly powers to Demeter." Frank racked his brain, but it was hard with the voices screaming in his head and the cataplep's poison making him dizzy. Demeter, he said, the plant goddess. She didn't like Hades because... Suddenly he recalled an old story he'd heard at Camp Jupiter. Her daughter, Persephone, Trip corrected. I prefer the Greek, if you don't mind. Kill him, Mars screamed. I love this guy, Ares yelled back. Kill him anyway. Frank decided not to take offence. He didn't want to get turned into a sorghum plant. Okay, Hades kidnapped Persephone. Exactly, Trip said. So Persephone was a friend of yours? Trip snorted. I was just a mortal prince back then. Persephone wouldn't have noticed me. But when her mother, Demeter, went searching for her, scouring the whole earth, not many people would help her. Hecate lit her way at night with her torches. And when Demeter came to my part of Greece, I gave her a place to stay. I comforted her, gave her a meal and offered my assistance. I didn't know she was a goddess at the time, but my good deed paid off. Later, Demeter rewarded me by making me a god of farming. Wow, Frank said. Farming? Congratulations. I know, pretty awesome, right? Anyway, Demeter never got along with Hades, so naturally, I have to side with my patron goddess. Children of Hades, forget it. In fact, one of them, this Scythian king named Lynkos, well, I tried to teach his countrymen about farming, and he killed my right python. Your right python? Trip marched over to his winged chariot and hopped in. He pulled a lever and the wings began to flap. The spotted python on the left wheel opened his eyes. He started to writhe, coiling around the axle like a spring. The chariot whirred into motion, but the right wheel stayed in place. So Triptolemus spun in circles, and the chariot beating its wings and bouncing up and down like a defective merry-go-round. You see, he said as he spun, no good. Ever since I lost my right python, haven't been able to spread the word about farming, at least not in person. Now I have to resort to giving online courses. What? As soon as he said it, Frank was sorry he'd asked. Trip hopped off the chariot while it was still spinning. The python slowed to a stop and went back to snoring. Trip jogged over to a line of computers. He tapped the keyboards and the screens woke up, displaying a website in maroon and gold with a picture of a happy farmer in a toga and a farmer's hat standing with his bronze scythe in a field of wheat. Triptolemus Farming University, he announced proudly. In just 6 weeks you can get your bachelor's degree in the exciting and vibrant career of the future. Farming. Frank felt a bead of sweat trickle down his cheek. He didn't care about this crazy god or his snake-powered chariot or his online degree program, but Hazel was turning greener by the moment. Nico was a corn plant, and he was alone. Look, he said, we did bring you the almanac, and my friends are really nice. They're not like those other children of Hades you've met, so if there's any way... Oh, Trip snapped his fingers. I see where you're going. You do? Absolutely. If I cure your friend Hazel and return the other one, Nico. If I return him to normal... Frank hesitated. Yes? Then in exchange you stay with me and take up farming. A child of Mars is my apprentice. It's perfect. What a spokesman you'll be. We can beat swords into plowshares and have so much fun. Actually, Frank tried frantically to come up with a plan. Ares and Mars screamed in his head, swords, guns, massive kabooms. If he declined Trip's offer, Frank figured he would offend the guy and end up as a sorghum or wheat or some other cash crop. If it was the only way to save Hazel, then sure, he could agree to Trip's demands and become a farmer. But that couldn't be the only way. Frank refused to believe he'd been chosen by the fates to go on this quest just so he could take online courses in turnip cultivation. Frank's eyes wandered to the broken chariot. I have a better offer, he blurted out. I can fix that. Trip's smile melted. Fix my chariot? Frank wanted to kick himself. What was he thinking? He wasn't Leo. He couldn't even figure out a stupid pair of Chinese handcuffs. He could barely change the batteries in a TV remote. He couldn't fix a magical chariot. But something told him it was his only chance. That chariot was the only thing Triptolemus might really want. I'll go find a way to fix the chariot, he said. In return, you fix Nico and Hazel. Let us go in peace and give us whatever aid you can to defeat Gaia's forces. Triptolemus laughed. What makes you think I can aid you with that? Hecate told us so, Frank said. She sent us here. She decided Hazel is one of her favourites. The colour drained from Trip's face. Hecate? Frank hoped he wasn't overstating things. He didn't need Hecate mad at him too, but if Triptolemus and Hecate were both friends of Demeter, maybe that would convince Trip to help. The goddess guided us to your almanac in Bologna, Frank said. She wanted us to return it to you because, well, She must have known you had some knowledge that would help us get through the House of Hades in Epirus. Trip nodded slowly. Yes, I see. I know why Hecate sent you to me. Very well, son of Mars. Go find a way to fix my chariot. If you succeed, I will do as you ask. If not... I know, Frank grumbled. My friends die. Yes, Trip said cheerfully. And you'll make a lovely patch of sorghum. Chapter 20. Frank. Frank stumbled out of the black house. The door shut behind him and he collapsed against the wall, overcome with guilt. Fortunately, the Catapleponus had cleared off, or he might have just sat there and let them trample him. He deserved nothing better. He'd left Hazel inside, dying and defenceless, at the mercy of a crazy farmer god. Kill farmers, Ares screamed in his head. Return to the Legion and fight Greeks, Mars said. What are we doing here? Killing farmers, Ares screamed back. Shut up, Frank yelled aloud. Both of you. A couple of old ladies with shopping bags shuffled past. They gave Frank a strange look, muttered something in Italian and kept going. Frank stared miserably at Hazel's cavalry sword lying at his feet, next to his backpack. He could run back to the Argo 2 and get Leo. Maybe Leo could fix the chariot. But Frank somehow knew this wasn't a problem for Leo. It was Frank's task. He had to prove himself. Besides, the chariot wasn't exactly broken. There was no mechanical problem. It was missing a serpent. Frank could turn himself into a python. When he'd woken up that morning as a giant snake, perhaps it had been a sign from the gods. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life turning the wheel of a farmer's chariot, but if it meant saving Hazel... No, there had to be another way. Serpents, Frank thought. Mars. Did his father have some connection to snakes? Mars's sacred animal was the wild boar, not the serpent. Still, Frank was sure he'd heard something once. He could think of only one person to ask. Reluctantly, he opened his mind to the voices of the war god. I need a snake, he told them. How? Ha ha, Ares screamed. Yes, the serpent. Like that vile Cadmus, Mars said. We punished him for killing our dragon. They both started yelling until Frank thought his brain would split in half. Okay, stop. The voices quieted. Cadmus, Frank muttered. Cadmus. The story came back to him. The demigod Cadmus had slain a dragon that happened to be a child of Ares. How Ares had ended up with a dragon for a son, Frank didn't want to know, but as punishment for the dragon's death, Ares turned Cadmus into a snake. So, you can turn your enemies into snakes, Frank said. That's what I need. I need to find an enemy. Then I need you to turn him into a snake. You think I would do that for you? Ares roared. You have not proven your worth. Only the greatest hero could ask such a boon, Mars said. A hero like Romulus. Too Roman, Ares shouted. Diomedes. Never, Mars shouted back. That coward fell to Heracles. Horatius, then, Ares suggested. Mars went silent. Frank sensed a grudging agreement. Horatius, Frank said. Fine, if that's what it takes. I'll prove I'm as good as Horatius. What did he do? Images flooded into Frank's mind. He saw a lone warrior standing on a stone bridge, facing an entire army massed on the far side of the Tiber River. Frank remembered the legend. Horatius, the Roman general, had single-handedly held off a horde of invaders, sacrificing himself on that bridge to keep the barbarians from crossing the Tiber. By giving his fellow Romans time to finish their defences, he'd saved the Republic. Venice is overrun, Mars said, as Rome was about to be. Cleanse it. Destroy them all, Ares said. Put them to the sword. Frank pushed the voices to the back of his mind. He looked at his hands and was amazed they weren't trembling. For the first time in days, his thoughts were clear. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He didn't know how he would pull it off. The odds of dying were excellent, but he had to try. Hazel's life depended on him. He trapped Hazel's sword to his belt, morphed his backpack into a quiver and bow, and raced towards the piazza where he'd fought the cow monsters. The plan had 3 phases: dangerous, really dangerous, and insanely dangerous. Frank stopped at the old stone well. No Catapleponus in sight. He drew Hazel's sword and used it to prise up some cobblestones, unearthing a big tangle of spiky roots. The tendrils unfurled, exuding their stinky green fumes as they crept towards Frank's feet. In the distance, a cataplep's foghorn moan filled the air. Others joined in from all different directions. Frank wasn't sure how the monsters could tell he was harvesting their favourite food. Maybe they just had an excellent sense of smell. He had to move fast now. He sliced off a long cluster of vines and laced them through one of his belt loops, trying to ignore the burning and itching in his hands. Soon he had a glowing, stinking lasso of poisonous weeds. Hooray! The first few Catapleponus lumbered into the piazza, bellowing in anger. Green eyes glowed under their manes, their long snouts blew clouds of gas like furry steam engines. Frank knocked an arrow. He had a momentary pang of guilt. Though these were not the worst monsters he'd met, they were basically grazing animals that happened to be poisonous. Hazel is dying because of them, he reminded himself. He let the arrow fly. The nearest catapleps collapsed, crumbling to dust. He knocked a second arrow, but the rest of the herd was almost on top of him. More were charging into the square from the opposite direction. Frank turned into a lion. He roared defiantly and leapt towards the archway, straight over the heads of the second herd. The two groups of Catapleponus slammed into each other, but quickly recovered and ran after him. Frank hadn't been sure the roots would still smell when he changed form. Unusually, his clothes and possessions just sort of melted into his animal shape, but apparently he still smelled like a yummy poisoned dinner. Each time he raced past a catapleps, it roared with outrage and joined the Kill Frank parade. He turned into a larger street and pushed through the crowds of tourists. What the mortals saw, he had no idea. A cat being chased by a pack of dogs? People cursed Frank in about 12 different languages. Gelato cones went flying. A woman spilled a stack of carnival masks. One dude toppled into the canal. When Frank glanced back, he had at least 24 monsters on his tail. But he needed more. He needed all the monsters in Venice, and he had to keep the ones behind him enraged. He found an open spot in the crowd and turned back into a human. He drew Hazel's spather, never his preferred weapon, but he was big enough and strong enough that the heavy cavalry sword didn't bother him. In fact, he was glad for the extra reach. He slashed the golden blade, destroying the first catapleps and letting the others bunch up in front of him. He tried to avoid their eyes, but he could feel their gaze burning into him. He figured that if all these monsters breathed on him at once, their combined noxious cloud would be enough to melt him into a puddle. The monsters crowded forward and slammed into one another. Frank yelled, "You want my poison roots? Come and get them." He turned into a dolphin and jumped into the canal. He hoped Catapleponus couldn't swim. At the very least, they seemed reluctant to follow him in, and he couldn't blame them. The canal was disgusting, smelly and salty, as warm as soup. But Frank forged through it, dodging gondolas and speedboats, pausing occasionally to chitter dolphin insults at the monsters who followed him on the sidewalks. When he reached the nearest gondola deck, Frank turned back into a human again, stabbed a few more Catapleponus to keep them angry, and took off running. So it went. After a while, Frank fell into a kind of daze. He attracted more monsters, scattered more crowds of tourists, and led his now massive following of Catapleponus through the winding streets of the old city. Whenever he needed a quick escape, he dived into a canal as a dolphin or turned into an eagle and soared overhead. But he never got too far ahead of his pursuers. Whenever he felt like the monsters might be losing interest, he stopped on a rooftop and drew his bow. Picking off a few of the Catapleponus in the centre of the herd, he shook his lasso of poison vines and insulted the monster's bad breath, stirring them into a fury. Then he continued the race. He backtracked. He lost his way. Once he turned a corner and ran into the tail end of his own monster mob. He should have been exhausted, yet somehow he found the strength to keep going, which was good. The hardest part was yet to come. He spotted a couple of bridges, but they didn't look right. One was elevated and completely covered. No way could he get the monsters to funnel through it. Another was too crowded with tourists, even if the monsters ignored the mortals. That noxious gas couldn't be good for anyone to breathe. The bigger the monster herd got, the more mortals would get pushed aside, knocked into the water or trampled. Finally, Frank saw something that would work. Just ahead, past a big piazza, a wooden bridge spanned one of the widest canals. The bridge itself was a latticed arc of timber, like an old-fashioned roller coaster, about 50 metres long. From above, in eagle form, Frank saw no monsters on the far side. Every catapleps in Venice seemed to have joined the herd and was pushing through the streets behind him as tourists screamed and scattered, maybe thinking they were caught in the midst of a stray dog stampede. The bridge was empty of foot traffic. It was perfect. Frank dropped like a stone and turned back to human form. He ran to the middle of the bridge, a natural choke point, and threw his bait of poisonous roots on the deck behind him. As the front of the catapleps herd reached the base of the bridge, Frank drew Hazel's golden spather. "Come on," he yelled. "You want to know what Frank Zhang is worth? Come on!" He realised he wasn't just shouting at the monsters. He was venting weeks of fear, rage and resentment. The voices of Mars and Ares screamed right along with him. The monsters charged. Frank's vision turned red. Later, he couldn't remember the details clearly. He sliced through monsters until he was ankle deep in yellow dust. Whenever he got overwhelmed and the clouds of gas began to choke him, he changed shape, became an elephant, a dragon, a lion, and each transformation seemed to clear his lungs, giving him a fresh burst of energy. His shape-shifting became so fluid, he could start an attack in human form with his sword and finish as a lion, raking his claws across a cataplep's snout. The monsters kicked with their hooves. They breathed noxious gas and glared straight at Frank with their poisonous eyes. He should have died. He should have been trampled. But somehow he stayed on his feet, unharmed, and unleashed a hurricane of violence. He didn't feel any sort of pleasure in this, but he didn't hesitate either. He stabbed one monster and beheaded another. He turned into a dragon and bit a catapleps in half, then changed into an elephant and trampled three at once under his feet. His vision was still tinted red, and he realized his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. He was actually glowing, surrounded by a rosy aura. He didn't understand why, but he kept fighting until there was only one monster left. Frank faced it with his sword drawn. He was out of breath, sweaty and caked in monster dust, but he was unharmed. The catapleps snarled. It must not have been the smartest monster. Despite the fact that several hundred of its brethren had just died, it did not back down. "Mars," Frank yelled, "I've proven myself. Now I need a snake." Frank doubted anyone had ever shouted those words before. It was kind of a weird request. He got no answer from the skies. For once, the voices in his head were silent. The catapleps lost patience. It launched itself at Frank and left him no choice. He slashed upward. As soon as his blade hit the monster, the catapleps disappeared in a flash of blood-red light. When Frank's vision cleared, a mottled brown Burmese python was coiled at his feet. "Well done," said a familiar voice. Standing a few feet away was his dad, Mars, wearing a red beret and olive fatigues with the insignia of the Italian Special Forces, an assault rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was hard and angular, his eyes covered with dark sunglasses. "Frank." "Father," Frank managed. He couldn't believe what he'd just done. The terror started to catch up with him. He felt like sobbing, but he guessed that would be not a good idea in front of Mars. "It's natural to feel fear." The war god's voice was surprisingly warm, full of pride. "All great warriors are afraid. Only the stupid and the delusional are not. But you faced your fear, my son. You did what you had to do. Like Horatius. This was your bridge and you defended it." Frank wasn't sure what to say. I just needed a snake." A tiny smile tugged at Mars' mouth. "Yes, and now you have one. Your bravery has united my forms, Greek and Roman, if only for a moment. Go save your friends. But hear me, Frank, your greatest test is yet to come, when you face the armies of Gaia at Epirus, your leadership." Suddenly the god doubled over, clutching his head. His form flickered, his fatigues turned into a toga, then a biker's jacket and jeans. His rifle changed into a sword and then a rocket launcher. "Agony!" Mars bellowed. "Go! Hurry!" Frank didn't ask questions. Despite his exhaustion, he turned into a giant eagle, snatched up the python in his massive claws, and launched himself into the air. When he glanced back, a miniature mushroom cloud erupted from the middle of the bridge, rings of fire washing outwards, and a pair of voices, Mars and Ares, screamed, "No!" Frank wasn't sure what had just happened, but he had no time to think about it. He flew over the city, now completely empty of monsters, and headed for the house of Triptolemus. "You found one!" the farmer god exclaimed. Frank ignored him. He stormed into La Casanera, dragging the python by its tail like a very strange Santa Claus bag, and dropped it next to the bed. He knelt at Hazel's side. She was still alive, green and shivering, barely breathing, but alive. As for Nico, he was still a corn plant. "Heal them," Frank said. "Now." Triptolemus crossed his arms. "How do I know the snake will work?" Frank gritted his teeth. Since the explosion on the bridge, the voices of the war god had gone silent in his head, but he still felt their combined anger churning inside him. He felt physically different too. Had Triptolemus got shorter? "The snake is a gift from Mars," Frank growled. "It will work." As if on cue, the Burmese python slithered over to the chariot and wrapped itself around the right wheel. The other snake woke up. The two serpents checked each other out, touching noses, then turned their wheels in unison. The chariot inched forward, its wings flapping. "You see," Frank said. "Now, heal my friends." Triptolemus tapped his chin. "Well, thank you for the snake, but I'm not sure I like your tone, demigod. Perhaps I'll turn you into—" Frank was faster. He lunged at Trip and slammed him into the wall, his fingers locked around the god's throat. "Think about your next words," Frank warned, deadly calm, "or instead of beating my sword into a ploughshare, I will beat it into your head." Triptolemus gulped. "You know, I think I'll heal your friends. Swear it on the river Styx." I swear it on the river Styx." Frank released him. Triptolemus touched his throat, as if making sure it was still there. He gave Frank a nervous smile, edged around him and scurried off to the front room. Just gathering herbs. Frank watched as the god picked leaves and roots and crushed them in a mortar. He rolled a pill-sized ball of green goop and jogged to Hazel's side. He placed the gunk ball under Hazel's tongue. Instantly she shuddered and sat up, coughing. Her eyes flew open. The greenish tint in her skin disappeared. She looked around, bewildered, until she saw Frank. What? Frank tackled her in a hug. You're going to be fine, he said fiercely. Everything is fine. But Hazel gripped his shoulders and stared at him in amusement and amazement. Frank, what happened to you? To me, he stood, suddenly self-conscious. I don't... He looked down and realised what she meant. Triptolemus hadn't got shorter. Frank was taller. His gut had shrunk. His chest seemed bulkier. Frank had had growth spurts before. Once he'd woken up 2 centimetres taller than when he'd gone to sleep. But this was nuts. It was as if some of the dragon and lion had stayed with him when he turned back to human. Maybe I can fix it. Hazel laughed with delight. Why? You look amazing. I do? I mean, you were handsome before, but you look older and taller and so distinguished. Triptolemus heaved a dramatic sigh. Yes, obviously some sort of blessing from Mars. Congratulations, blah, blah, blah. Now, if we're done here... Frank glared at him. We're not done. Heal Nico. The farm god rolled his eyes. He pointed at the corn plant, and bam! Nico D'Angelo appeared in an explosion of corn silk. Nico looked around in a panic. I had the weirdest nightmare about popcorn. He frowned at Frank. Why are you taller? Everything's fine, Frank promised. Triptolemus was about to tell us how to survive the House of Hades. Weren't you, Trip? The farm god raised his eyes to the ceiling like, Why me, Demeter? Fine, Trip said. When you arrive at Epirus, you will be offered a chalice to drink from. Offered by whom? Nico asked. Doesn't matter, Trip snapped. Just know that it is filled with deadly poison. Hazel shuddered. So you're saying that we shouldn't drink it? No, Trip said. You must drink it, or you'll never be able to make it through the temple. The poison connects you to the world of the dead, lets you pass into the lower levels. The secret to surviving is... His eyes twinkled. Barley. Frank stared at him. Barley. In the front room, take some of my special barley. Make it into little cakes. Eat these before you step into the House of Hades. The barley will absorb the worst of the poison, so it will affect you, but not kill you. That's it? Nico demanded. Hecate sent us halfway across Italy so you could tell us to eat barley. Good luck. Triptolemus sprinted across the room and hopped in his chariot. And Frank Zhang, I forgive you. You got spunk. If you ever change your mind, my offer is open. I'd love to see you get a degree in farming. Yeah, Frank muttered. Thanks. The god pulled a lever on his chariot. The snake wheels turned. The wings flapped. At the back of the room, the garage doors rolled open. Oh, to be mobile again, Trip cried. So many ignorant lands in need of my knowledge. I will teach them the glories of tilling, irrigation, fertilizing. The chariot lifted off and zipped out of the house. Triptolemus shouting to the sky, Away, my serpents! Away! That, Hazel said, was very strange. The glories of fertilizing. Nico brushed some corn silk off his shoulder. Can we get out of here now? Hazel put her hand on Frank's shoulder. Are you okay, really? You bartered for our lives. What did Triptolemus make you do? Frank tried to hold it together. He scolded himself for feeling so weak. He could face an army of monsters, but as soon as Hazel showed him kindness, he wanted to break down and cry. Those cow monsters, the Catapleponus, that poisoned you. I had to destroy them. That was brave, Nico said. There must have been, 6 or 7 left in that herd? No, Frank cleared his throat. All of them. I killed all of them in the city. Nico and Hazel stared at him in stunned silence. Frank was afraid they might doubt him or start to laugh. How many monsters had he killed on that bridge? 200? 300? But he saw in their eyes that they believed him. They were children of the underworld. Maybe they could sense the death and carnage he unleashed. Hazel kissed his cheek. She had to stand on her tiptoes to do it now. Her eyes were incredibly sad, as if she realised something had changed in Frank. Something much more important than the physical growth spurt. Frank knew it too. He would never be the same. He just wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Well, Nico said, breaking the tension. Does anyone know what barley looks like?